The Prime Minister's future hangs in the balance as two of his most senior ministers resign. A very good morning to you. It is 6 o'clock on this Wednesday, the 6th of July. You're tuned into Breakfast on GB News with me, Eamonn, Holmes, here in the studio, and at Downing Street, Isabel, Webster. Here's what's leading the news this morning. The Prime Minister is facing chaos in his leadership after the shock resignations of his Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and Health Secretary, Sajid Javid. In a statement last night, Mr Javid said the government was not acting in the national interest. The PM has moved quickly to replace them, promoting the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, to Chancellor, and former Chief of Staff, Steve Barclay, to Health Secretary. All this comes ahead of the elections to the 1922 Committee Executive, the body which will decide if another vote of no confidence can be held within the next few weeks. Now, you can join any of our discussions, have your say on the prevailing situation this morning. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet at gbnews as well. OK, so it's all about the Prime Minister today. His future is in question after the resignation of two of his most senior cabinet ministers. This was at 6 o'clock last night. The Chancellor and the Health Secretary stood down moments after the PM apologised for appointing the MP accused of groping, Chris Pincher, to a government role. He will face interrogation by MPs in the House of Commons today during Prime Minister's questions. For more, let's go live now to Isabel, who is outside Downing Street, as you can see there this morning. Any sightings, anybody coming and going, Isabel?
Good morning to you from an eerily quiet Downing Street. It's hard to believe the magnitude of what happened behind that famous door just 12 hours ago as two key allies of the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, both handing in their resignations and destabilising an already shaky Premiership. We'll have full analysis for you live from Downing Street this morning on what was essentially and arguably the most dramatic evening since Margaret Thatcher herself resigned all those years ago. I've been looking out this morning for signs of suitcases or perhaps the Prime Minister himself going off for one of his characteristic early morning runs, but doubtless just a sleepless night for so many in that building behind me last night as they try to shore up a destabilised government. Let's bring in our political correspondent now, Tom Harwood, to talk about all of this. Just give us a sense, first of all, of how today might play out. There are two key set-piece events going on. We've got PMQs at midday, which are quite frankly going to be fireworks. And we have a liaison committee meeting this afternoon, which is undoubtedly going to provide some very difficult questions for the Prime Minister, if indeed he's able to attend them.
Certainly, and the message that we're getting from Downing Street, the message that was clearly sent last night, just a couple of hours after those resignations dropped, within 10 minutes of each other, just after 6 p.m. yesterday. The message from Downing Street is it's business as usual, that these are jobs that were swiftly replaced, that they're getting on with the job. But just how will that land with MPs? It will be fascinating to be watching what sort of reaction Boris Johnson gets as he walks into the chamber. Usually a big roar from those MPs behind him. Perhaps it will be less ebullient today, but also, of course, we'll be expecting some more junior roles to be filled. Not a wide-ranging reshuffle, of course, but in his last-minute shuffling of the decks in terms of getting a new Chancellor and a new Health Secretary, well, there's a gap in terms of who is his Chief of Staff. There's indeed a gap in terms of who is the Solicitor General. There are gaps to be filled today as well, so we'll be expecting some more appointments, perhaps some members of Parliament walking down this street later on this morning too.
Well, Tom, let's analyse a little bit about what happened last night, because it was around 6 o'clock when, in quick succession, and we're told not in a coordinated attack on the Premiership of the Prime Minister. First of all, it was Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary. I just want to read out some of the comments that he said. I'm instinctively a team player, but the British people also rightly expect integrity from their government, which is strong words from a former loyalist. We may not always have been popular, but we have been competent in acting in the national interest. Sadly, in the current circumstances, analysis, the public are concluding that we are neither. And then Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, saying the public rightly expect the government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously. I believe these standards are worth fighting for, and that is why I am resigning. Now, that happened. Huge blow, and obviously not expected by the Prime Minister, but those posts quickly filled by number 10 last night, and rumours about some of the goings-on and the tussles between some of the other cabinet members and who was to be appointed.
Absolutely. Rumours about a tussle between then Education Secretary Nadhim Zawahi, now, of course, Chancellor, and Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, with Boris Johnson toying between the two of them in terms of who would become Chancellor. It's interesting, though, the succession of these letters, obviously kicked off by Sajid Javid with his letter, clearly not feeling able to defend the shifting line that had taken place between Friday and indeed Monday on this matter of what the Prime Minister knew and when about Christopher Pincher and his various appointments within government. It just seemed to be the case, I think, to Sajid Javid and indeed some other members of Parliament that the Prime Minister promised to shore up his number 10 operation. At the tail end of what was the Partygate investigation, he promised number 10 reform. He promised a more professional operation, fewer moving lines. And really what the scandal over the weekend demonstrated is that this was not as professional as an operation as had been promised. And then, of course, Rishi Sunak's letter, undated as it was, perhaps he had that in his back pocket in case there was any resignation taking place. OK, Tom, look, we're going to have more analysis from you throughout the course of the morning. Eamonn, I'm going to hand back to you as we really try and get a sense of how much longer the Prime Minister can hold on to the keys to that famous door behind me.
Maybe there'll be no resignation at all. We're joined by former advisor to Boris Johnson, now Conservative life peer, Lord Moylan, and the former Home Office Minister, Norman Baker, here in the studio. Lord Moylan, you know this man well. You've advised him, you've worked close beside him. He fights on, to use a phrase.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think there's no sense at all in Boris actually voluntarily resigning. And actually, I think the Cabinet is stronger this morning than it was yesterday morning, because we've seen two politicians go who basically at the end of their political lives. I mean, they don't really have a future. Rishi could have, but he doesn't really want it, I think. And they've gone, and they haven't been that strong and effective in the last few months.
You don't think you're looking at...
I think we're better off now.
You don't think you're looking at men who could be future Prime Ministers or leader of the Conservative Party in those two?
Well, I don't think Sajid Javid, following his own revelation that he was non-domiciled for 6 years while working here, can really put himself forward in front of people and say, I'm putting taxes up for you, or I'm... You know, yeah, I just don't think he's got a credibility.
Yeah.
Rishi's in a different position. Of course, he hasn't... I'm quite modern on this, Eamonn. I don't think somebody is responsible for his wife's tax affairs.
Yes.
So that's a different position. But I think he was promoted very early. He's had a lot of knocks he hadn't expected. He has lots of other opportunities in life. And I sometimes wonder if he really wants to go on. At that level. He could, you're right, he could.
You just heard Tom Harwood talking there about Rishi Sunak's letter, which was undated. So it could have come in any time. It may have been sitting there for a while, ready to go. But he talks about, and, you know, I'm asking you this because you worked side by side with Boris Johnson. Sunak says the public expected government to be conducted, his words, properly, competently and seriously. Has he a point?
Well, I think Boris is very, very serious. And I think when you look at the affairs he's engaged in, from public affairs, from the pandemic and Ukraine and so on, he's shown himself to be a very serious leader. I've always had some criticisms about the team that's there at number 10. We were told that would be improved. It has been improved to some extent, but you can always do better on that. I think he is competent. I think one of the problems is, though, that he is constantly under attack. There are constant there's the Dominic Cummings. I mean, Cummings must be the worst political appointment since Rasputin. When you think
Boris appointed him, didn't he?
Yeah, I know, that was a huge mistake. I imagine
Boris's judgment.
I imagine he regrets that very much indeed. And you know, consciously leaking and betraying from behind the scenes the whole time, with the deliberate view of getting him out. I think a lot of members of the public see that there is something of a campaign to get him out when they voted him in. And the argument that Boris should be removed by the electorate in a democracy, if he's going to be removed at all, not by a small band of skittish Conservative MPs, the argument that he should be given his chance to put himself in front of the electorate is a strong one in a democracy.
Yes. And maybe a very good one for him. Lord Moylan raises that point, Norman, and we've got Keir Starmer's calling for, a general election. And you sit there, look, if there's, there are a few ways out, perhaps, for Boris Johnson, but a general election could well be one of them.
Well, it could be. He's got one roll of the dice left, in my view, which is a general election if he wants to go down that road. And indeed, he may take the view cynically that it's a good idea to do that before the Privileges Committee reports on whether or not he's deliberately misled Parliament, which is an investigation which has now begun. Of course, Keir Starmer's asking for a general election. He couldn't not ask for a general election as leader of the opposition. Mm-hmm. But whether he actually wants one or not, I don't know. Because
so be careful what he asks for.
Well, you may take the view that Boris Johnson's the best recruiting sergeant for the Labour Party and Lib Dems at the moment.
Yeah. Lord Moylan, quite clearly saying, and I saw this from Jacob Rees-Mogg last night, that the Prime Minister fights on. He has absolutely no intention at this moment of resigning. Do you think he either has run out of road, is running out of road, or will stay on?
I think Lord Moynihan mentioned Rasputin earlier on in a different context. I mean, the Rasputin analogy I would give here is that Boris Johnson has been shot, he's been dumped in the river, he's been strangled, he's still there. He's not going anywhere unless he's absolutely crowbarred out of Downing Street by his own MPs. That's the only way he's going to go. He's made it very clear he wants to carry on, and I'm afraid that the Prime Minister, in my view, is interested predominantly in his own position, not interested in the Conservative Party or in the public at large or the nation, and that's what he's after. He wants power. He wants to stay in number 10. Well, that's where he's at.
Like the good Lord, you have worked with him through the London when he was London Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah. Where do you stand on the gradings of properly, competently and seriously conducting government?
I didn't warm to Boris Johnson when I was a Transport Minister. I found him somewhat arrogant and dismissive of other people. And I also found him duplicitous, quite frankly. And, I'm not a Conservative, but I've dealt with Conservatives whom I respect a great deal. I worked with Theresa May for over a year in the Home Office as a minister there. I didn't agree with Theresa May on very much at all, but I always thought Theresa May was basically decent, honest, had the interest of the country at heart. I don't think that's the case with the Prime Minister.
Look where she landed us.
Indeed, she wasn't a great success, but she was basically honest. I don't think this man is.
Mm. What has this man got, Lord? What has he got that we may miss if he goes?
Oh, I think what you're going to miss if Boris goes is a sense of a real person in Downing Street, a real person who has got flaws as well as strengths. I think you will get a succession of plastic, starting with, might be Keir Starmer, essentially inauthentic people dressed up, put up in front of cameras, all looking essentially the same, one after the other. And that is how life is going to go on, because nobody who has got any character at all will ever be allowed near Downing Street by his party, because it'll say, you cannot be yourself and be Prime Minister of this country.
And you are proud that he is leader of the Conservative Party, that he is running the country. You are happy to see the country being run by Boris Johnson.
This country is going through a period of very significant change.
Yes.
And we have not embraced how important those changes are as a country. We haven't embraced. So Brexit, all the other things that are happening, this is the time of huge change. Now, Boris has been at the heart of those. He's made those changes happen. There are some people who will never forgive him for that. There are some people who will carry on attacking him, and they will carry on attacking his character as far as they can, rather than his policies, which are not right-wing particularly. That some people complain about that. So they'll carry on attacking his character because they'll never forgive him for Brexit. Now, it's true that sometimes Boris and the operation at number 10 give them easy shots at the goal, and that is something that needs tightening up. But the truth is, we owe him a huge amount for the way he has turned this country into a new direction, both through Brexit, seeing us through the pandemic, And now we've got to get through the fact that the whole strategic position for the West has changed as a result of Putin's actions. And he is the one leading a whole swathe of Europe. I mean, Europe, the EU, is totally split on how to react in two camps. One of those camps looks to the UK, even though we've actually left the European Union. One of those camps looks to the UK. The French, Germans and Italians are all off trying to work out how not to humiliate Russia. But Boris has given real leadership to those Eastern European countries, really worked with Zelensky to show that you can stand up for our freedoms. Now, these are the really big issues, and I'm proud of the way he's conducted himself on those.
I actually agree with the Lord Moynihan that the response on Ukraine from the Prime Minister and the Cabinet has been good. I do think that's right. However, I think it's a stretch to say that this is about revenge for Brexit. There are a great many Conservative MPs, as he will know.
Heseltine last night. I mean, all Heseltine never appears on the television for revenge on Brexit.
He's not the only one. I mean, there are Conservative MPs, as you'll know, who have voted no confidence in the Prime Minister, who are strongly in favour of Brexit. This is not a Brexit issue.
No, it is a Brexit issue, but there are other issues going on. The big thing is the Brexit issue. The big thing
it's the big thing, not the Pincher effect.
Brexit. No, I think we've already moved on from Pincher.
Really, do you not think that he's facing this crisis because of a sex scandal? It's going to be a sex scandal that's brought him down.
Well,
yes.
No, I don't think that's right. He's facing this. I think he's coping with the crisis. He's not facing a crisis. He has handled well a crisis which has been brought on, not by a sex scandal as such, but by a question about his judgment in appointing somebody with a history of handsiness to a position.
That's not the issue. The issue is not the sex scandal involving this deputy whip who no one's ever heard of before last week. The issue is that he said he knew nothing about it, and then yesterday morning, let's just wind back 24 hours, Lord MacDonald, the former Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office, said he did know about it. He'd been briefed personally. And the issue is he has misled people. He's lied in public. And it's just the same as Partygate. When he makes a statement, he then has to resolve from it and he ends up apologising. It's the same pattern again and again.
And the pattern is deny, no, it didn't happen, then admit it did happen, then the same apology, I'm very sorry, I'm very sorry, I'm very sorry. Does that not begin to wear thin?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we get there in the end, don't we? I mean, he's different from other people. He's not a lawyer. I think it's really important that I'm not saying Boris lies and gets away with it, because essentially the Boris Johnson I know and worked with for 8 years is an essentially truthful person, and during those 8 years, there were no instances I can think of going out in public where I knew Boris said, I'm going to go out and tell a lie about this. Never, ever intended to do that. That was never his plan. He's an essentially truthful person.
He lied to Michael Howard, but Michael Howard was party leader and he got sacked for it.
There's one exception to that, and it's been constant through Boris's life. He does not see or accept why his private life should be something that we should be able to inquire into. He's kept his private... for example, he's never taken his family on the television to be photographed with them or anything like that. And he's kept all that up. There were no cameras at his wedding. You see what I mean? So there's always been this area where he feels my private life is my private life. I don't use it politically. Maybe he's not proud of his private life.
Maybe he wants his private life covered up.
That's entirely his business. I have no idea.
But that's his
point.
But he then sees that with other people. He hasn't got that judgment, that moral compass with other people.
It's not that he hasn't got a moral compass. It's rather, I think, that he doesn't believe he has... he should be interfering in other people's private lives. And it's true that he's too relaxed about that sometimes, and he didn't see the Pincher thing coming at him. Perhaps he should have been more rigorous and more censorious. But do remember, the Prime Minister, who actually had an investigation and cleared Chris Pincher and appointed him last time round, because he's been in and out of government, was Theresa May. And let's face it, I knew Theresa at university. I mean, she's pretty censorious about things she doesn't approve of. She approved of Chris Pincher and appointed him. So it's quite hard to say, well, she did it, but Boris did it, and he's the liar.
The issue for me is not the fact that he allowed this man to be a deputy whip. in the Conservative Party. That was a misjudgment in my view, but that's not the issue. The issue is he has denied having a personal briefing on it, saying he knew nothing about it, and then we found out he did. It's the same as Partygate. He said he knew nothing about parties in Downing Street. Then he got a fine from the Metropolitan Police for being there.
Well, there wasn't a party.
Well, why would you fine in that case?
Yeah, but come on. You say this is a lie because the Metropolitan Police decided later that it was a party and he paid the fine.
Caution.
I'd never. It wasn't a caution. It was a fixed penalty notice. But I would personally, if I'd been him, I'd have fought the bloody fixed penalty notice because I still think it's disgraceful. And so I would have done the same with Rishi. But Rishi walks into a room at the end of a meeting because he's coming into another meeting that's starting 10 minutes later. There are some people in the room. He gets fined because he's in the room. I mean, the whole thing is a complete nonsense. Boris genuinely didn't believe that walking into a room where he didn't expect to find people, there was a party. Now, most of these other events he's been tarred with that took place at Downing Street, he wasn't even in the building. He wasn't even in London at the time some of these things were happening.
Well, Lord
but he's
Moylan,
been tarred with all of them because people are determined to chip away at him.
thank you. Very good to hear from you. Lord Moylan will join us throughout the programme this morning, putting the case for the defence very well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And Norman Baker there for the case for the prosecution. Thank you both very, very much indeed. If you want to tweet us, it's at GB News. If you want to email us, it's... what is it? It is gbviews@gbnews.uk. More of this. This is the big story. This is what we're concentrating through the morning with. And remember, we want to hear from you, so we're going zooming to a number of your homes as you get in touch with us, and we'll be reflecting that throughout the programme and after the newspaper reviews. Back after this, here's your weather for this Wednesday.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A breezy day to come with some rain in the north, brighter skies further south with some sunshine for the far south of the UK, and feeling much warmer compared to recent days. High pressure is extending its influence across the southern half of the UK, but an area of low pressure is moving close to the north of Scotland, bringing some weather fronts with it, and that's why it is breezy, cloudy, and in some places wet across northern parts of the country. So for really northern Scotland, western Scotland, outbreaks of rain continuing through the morning into the early afternoon. The rain more on and off eastern Scotland, northern England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, petering out by the afternoon. But there is a gusty wind, and that's going to make it feel cool in the north. A complete contrast further south, 21 to 27 degrees with plenty of sunny spells. A sunnier day, in fact, compared to yesterday. And the cloud and the breeze in the north, well, that does push a little further south overnight, but the rain also peters out. The cloud develops some holes in it. However, we do have a relatively humid airflow now, and that means that it's going to be a mild or warm night in places, 16 or 17 degrees in the south, 12 to 14 degrees further north. A keen breeze runs down the North Sea on Thursday. That'll make it feel a bit cooler, and I think actually for many it's a cloudy start to the day. But as the day continues, the cloud will tend to lift and break up. Some decent sunny spells will break out, particularly for central and western areas. And for Scotland, certainly a brighter day with much less rain, but still some dampness in the far northwest. 16 Celsius in the Western Isles, 19 for Glasgow, 22 to 24 for southern parts of the UK. Friday is looking brighter and drier for many, plenty of sunshine around. Saturday is looking fine as well, and temperatures will rise.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Deborah, thanks very much indeed for your comments that are coming in. Boris Johnson's like Marmite. A lot of people don't like him. I don't think I've ever heard a Prime Minister say sorry like he has. He should stay, hopefully with people that want to get the country going again. Pauline says, what's the point of an election now? The people made their choice, but because the media press, who are venom infested, did not want him in, they've done their best to ruin him, and we accept that's what a lot of you think. I will never ever vote again after this public execution. Shame on all of them. Yes for Boris, says Elaine. So the Boris supporters watching us this morning, all morning, we will be reflecting on what happens next as Boris Johnson continues to fight off all these attacks, OK? We want to hear from you throughout the programme, of course, as you hear there, like Pauline and Elaine. GBviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet at gbnews. The Prime Minister's seat is in Uxbridge. Very, very thin majority. It's his constituency. He holds with a very thin majority of 7,210. We go live now to Alice Porter to find out what people who live there make of what is going on. Alice.
Good morning. Well, I have to say, this has been a very safe Tory seat ever since it was created in 2010. And because of all the wranglings that's been going on in Westminster, I have been to Uxbridge so many times over the last few months. I've been here speaking to people after Partygate, after the vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. And I have to say, when I've been out and about speaking to people, there has always been a degree of loyalty to the Prime Minister. A lot of people still very much support him. The question is, are they going to still support him after the resignations we saw yesterday from Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak? I mean, it's important to stress Gordon Brown, he also was able to survive when he had a ministerial resignation, but crucially the rest of the cabinet were very, very loyal to him. And I think that is the question, really, is a question of loyalty and whether other senior figures within the Conservative Party are going to be loyal to him. But if we're talking about loyalty, it's also important to think about the loyalty of people in his constituency. When I was out speaking with people last time, a lot of them were quite frustrated with him as a constituency MP, not just because, of course, you've got a Prime Minister as your local MP as well. He's often very much busy with Westminster, but because of everything that's been going on, I hate to say sort of scandal after scandal, really, with this Chris Pincher being the sort of icing on the cake there. I think a lot of people have felt when they were speaking to me that they felt that he was distracted because his attention was always in Westminster and it wasn't here in his constituency, which might not be a problem initially. I mean, it's important to stress, if Boris Johnson does decide to resign in the next 24 hours, for example, he still would be the MP for Uxbridge and Ruislip, but that could be a problem in 2 years' time if he doesn't keep his constituents on board when there's a general election.
Alice, thank you very much indeed. Going to be taking you through today's newspapers, David Miller and Sam Lister with those. Only one story in town. We'll see you right after this.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well.
I feel like I could take on the world.
Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Political commentator Norman Baker with me in the studio. We were in Uxbridge there, which is part of Greater London, and which is the seat, the constituency of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But as Norman Baker, a political commentator, was pointing out to me there, such a thin majority.
Well, some of us would be happy with 7,000 majorities when we were MPs, but having said that, what's happening in London particularly, not in the rest of the country actually so much, but in London, is a big swing to the Labour Party. We saw that in the local elections. And Uxbridge now is clearly very marginal and on the Labour Party's radar to pick up potentially at the next election. So we could be faced with a situation where the Prime Minister loses his seat. That's not impossible. I don't think the Prime Minister's ever lost his seat in my memory, but this is possibly going to happen here because 7,000 is not a great majority in London. And we saw a whole range of council seats move across to Labour at the last local elections. Of course, you can theoretically be a Prime Minister without your seat in the House of Commons.
Right, explain that one to me.
Because you're theoretically appointed by the Queen, and the Prime Minister can come from the Commons or the Lords in legal terms. I think the last time we had a Prime Minister not in the Commons was, I think, Lord Salisbury in 1902, so it's not the recent situation we've seen, but theoretically it's possible.
So he couldn't enter the House?
Well, he couldn't sit in the House. You'd have to make a statement from the House of Lords. We do have ministers in the House of Lords. I mean, in my time, we had Andrew Adonis, the Transport Minister, was actually in the House of Lords, and statements were made from there. He had somebody repeating those statements in the Commons. It could be done, but it's clearly very unusual.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of things that are very unusual about this whole situation. Norman, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. And with the time at 6:33, let's bring you up to date with the main news of the day. The Brexit Minister, Lord Frost, has joined calls for Boris Johnson to resign, saying the PM risks bringing the government down with him if he hangs on. Now, this comes after Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid stepped down as Chancellor and Health Secretary, respectively, following the Prime Minister's apology for appointing Chris Pincher Deputy Chief Whip, despite previous complaints about him. Police have recorded an 84% rise in online grooming crimes in the last 4 years, with the NSPCC saying there have been more than 27,000 offences since 2017. The government's now planning to give the regulator, Ofcom, more powers to make platforms such as Facebook and Snapchat do more to tackle abuse. Petrol prices have hit another record high. According to the RAC in June, the average cost of a litre of fuel rose by more than 16% to 191.4 pence. Right, to the papers now. Joining us, the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury under Margaret Thatcher, David Miller, and Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Express, that's Sam Lister. And David, we're going to begin with you. We go to the Times. Tory rebels. OK, will there be more resignations, or is that it?
So he's finished. So we don't need to worry about that. The issue is, how is it all going to end? You know, I don't know whether you're a T.S. Eliot fan. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. And there'll be a whimper at the end as he is dragged out of number 10. But he is finished, and I think that...
Can you explain to people how he is finished? Because a lot of people don't want to believe that. He does not want to believe that. And people say if he is finished, he will have to be dragged kicking and screaming.
Yeah. The reality is that it will gradually dawn on everyone around him that you cannot have... Look, you look at the leader in the Times today, where they talk about his dishonesty. You cannot have a Prime Minister spoken of in the leader of a prominent newspaper like the Times as being dishonest. You know, normally, leaders are about, well, in newspapers, we disagree with the Prime Minister on this. And I think his credibility has been completely shot to pieces. And one of the reasons I picked up this piece by Danny Finkelstein is that basically what he says is about Johnson, the journalist, and Johnson, the politician. It's quite interesting. He says, Boris Johnson is a man of great talent. I know that because for many years we're in the same trade and I saw him achieve spectacular success. His wit and dash made him almost unfeasibly famous. He built an audience and then launched a political career on the back of it. So far, so good. But his great talents, humour, creativity, chaotic subversion of the rules, do not include some of those necessary to be a suitable Prime Minister. He needs self-discipline and lacks it, an unswerving truthfulness, a quality that eludes him, an ability to master detail, which he skates over, a strong sense of who he is and what he stands for, which he doesn't have. These flaws means that he cannot hold office. Now, if people in the Conservative Party... You see, can I just contrast, if I may, the difference between the demise of Mrs Thatcher, where there was no whimper, there was more of a bang. But basically, Margaret Thatcher, for all her many faults, had a cabinet full of people who thought for themselves, whereas, for the most part, Boris Johnson doesn't. She asked members of her cabinet, when she failed to win a suitable majority. She won, but not a proper majority as leader. She asked members of her cabinet to go and see her individually and say whether they thought she should continue. And when they said they didn't think she should continue, she left. I know what Boris thinks the members of his cabinet are there for, but they ought to be advising him. And finally, of course, the person, and I have great fondness for him, who had a key role in this was Dennis Thatcher. He just put his hand on her arm and said, it's time to go. Carrie's too busy, no doubt, choosing expensive wallpaper and not really interested in what he does. But I tell you something, for the good of this country, Boris Johnson's got to go, and he will be dragged out. This game is over. It's just that some of the people won't leave the pitch.
Some of the people won't leave the pitch. Now, Sam Lister, as the political editor of the Daily Express, the Times and David both talk about the PM's dishonesty. I can tell you, I've got views coming in. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people just come in front of me. They don't care. They absolutely, it doesn't seem to matter. Although, you know, a lot of us would say, well, it's integral to the job, to the position, the office that he holds, that he tells the truth. A lot of people just don't care.
Absolutely, and Boris Johnson clearly drives his opponents crazy. But they have been unable to land a fatal blow. Even the resignation of Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid last night, that did not lead the rest of the cabinet to walk out. So he's still there. He's appointed a new chancellor. He's appointed a new health secretary. You know, he's made a very clear statement of intent that he's going to carry on. And what are the means to drag him out of there? You know, his opponents just aren't really very organised. Now, obviously, he's got an absolutely turbulent day ahead of him. He's got Prime Minister's questions. He's appearing before senior MPs at the liaison committee. We could get the resignation statements from the former Chancellor and the former Health Secretary today. That could be potentially very, very excruciating for him. But ultimately, his opponents have not managed to properly stage this coup.
I mean, I'm fascinated about the choreography that is going on, this dance that is taking place. Take Nadhim Zahawi, for instance, who's just been appointed as the new Chancellor. Does that help or hinder, because he's talked about as, one of the possible people who could succeed Boris Johnson if it comes to that. Has he helped or hindered his chances by staying loyal?
Well, it's very tricky, isn't it? Because obviously he will be thinking about his future career options. Will he throw his hat in the ring should the vacancy come up? But actually, if you are there and the chancellorship is available, you're going to take it, aren't you? So he's
a lot of the PM-ship's available.
That is very true. But is Boris Johnson really going to be out of office as quickly as everybody says? This is the thing. He defies all the laws of political gravity.
But the interesting point is about Nadhim Zahawi, who I've known for more than 30 years. In fact, we spent the evening at his flat before I went down to be defeated in the 1997 election. And I once, showing the usual perception that I have, said to Nadhim, "You've got a very good business in YouGov. What on earth do you want to be bothered with politics?" Well, thank goodness he is one of the few shining stars. But I would have liked him not to have said yes to be Chancellor, because I think it taints and contaminates him if you accept my thesis. And we'll see if I'm right. Mystic Mellor fills his crystal balls and thinks that this is all game over for Johnson. And the fact he isn't prepared to admit it yet doesn't mean he won't have to. But Nadhim is too good a person to be used as, to be manipulated by Johnson. But I guess what he feels is, if he is the man in possession of the chancellorship and nobody is going to replace him. I know Liz Truss thought she could be chancellor. Amusing thought that she did. But Nadhim is a serious business person and a clever man, and he probably feels he's not going to be too contaminated by the curse of Boris.
So, Boris is now saying, or it's reported that he said last night, Sunak's gone, good, now I can cut taxes. Do you think there's any truth in that?
Well, we've heard the cutting taxes promise over and over and over, and actually all we've seen is more spending. So I think, it might be a long wait before we actually see that become a reality. But what's important is that he's actually making the right noises to those people who are still loyal to him. And that's quite important. He's saying, actually, now I'm free of Rishi Sunak, I can actually go ahead and cut taxes. It was all his fault. Shift the blame onto him. This is the new start. This is the latest reset. Yeah. We can move on. But obviously, look, it's absolutely clear this is a very perilous 24 hours for him today. He's got a very, very difficult day ahead of him.
But the paper you have chosen, the Mail, it's quite an amusing headline, really, and it says, can even Boris, the greased piglet, wriggle out of this? So the thing is, with the summer recess nearly upon us, was it 2 weeks away or so?
3 weeks,
yeah. 3 weeks away. He couldn't he, for at least until September?
Yeah, look, I think, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility, that Boris Johnson will still be here as we go into the summer recess, and Keir Starmer could actually be out. He's still waiting this Durham police investigation into Beergate. He's promised to quit if they find against him. You could realistically see the possibility of Keir Starmer being the one who's out by summer and Boris Johnson still being there.
What about Keir Starmer's tactic of saying, let's call a general election, let's have a refresh, a reboot? Because that actually could be music to Boris Johnson's ears, couldn't it?
Well, I think that Keir Starmer is, not very comfortable with the way that politicians should behave in situations like this. And it's a huge benefit to Boris that Keir Starmer is around. And obviously, I think Keir Starmer is a weak and unconvincing leader. But, we can worry about him next week. I'm worried about Boris this week. I simply cannot see how Boris can survive because the essential pillars that support him have fallen away. And what's going to happen? The 22 committee will be put under pressure to have a further vote. More people will come out with more scathing comments to the point that even Boris, thick-skinned though he might be, is going to have to stick around. All that some of his cabinet have guaranteed is that when Boris goes, they'll have to go too. I mean, it is appalling, actually, in this country. I mean, when Margaret Thatcher's cabinet, although they were often criticised, when they had to step up to the plate and make a decisive move, they did so with courage and integrity. The fact that he has people in his cabinet who cannot see that the end is nigh is a suggestion that the politics has become so weak that even cabinet ministers are afraid to stand up.
But when I look at some of the people in the cabinet, it is quite obvious, is it not, that they wouldn't be getting jobs, Sam, anywhere else. I'm not going to name names, but you can see they're only there at the behest of Boris Johnson.
I wouldn't like to be drawn on their qualities. I'm sure, you know, they all think they're there on merit, and that's the case. I think what was interesting, actually, the Daily Mail has a little quote from Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary. He has been quite strident in saying, look, I'm not quitting, I'm not indulging in these political parlour games because there's a serious job to be done here. We've got the invasion of Ukraine to deal with. He's going to meet he talks about meeting the brave people of Ukraine on Thursday, and that's his focus. And, you know, that's why he's not quitting the cabinet. He's got actually quite a big job to do. That's just in. Stanley Johnson, Boris Johnson's father, says that he is convinced that his son will carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fond of Stanley. I regard Stanley as rather a chum. And obviously he's just being loyal to Boris because, remember, Stanley is not Boris in terms of his politics. Stanley was in favour of Europe. Stanley is quite a liberal-minded man who I worked with closely when we were reforming the law on animal experiments, where he was a member of the European Parliament, was a huge help to me. So I guess Stanley's got to say that. I personally hope that behind the scenes, Stanley is suggesting that, you know, there comes a moment when all you do is just stand there with more and more arrows hitting you. And that's the position Boris is in. He's lost his ability to manoeuvre. And though he is a greased piglet, even greased piglets get put down at some point.
Wow. Do you agree with what David has had to say? You can tweet at gbnews.uk. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'd love to hear from you. Guys, we'll hear from you again in 45 minutes. But let's bring you up to date with what's happening news-wise today. Only one story in town, really. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, saying the government's collapsing and Boris Johnson's unfit to govern. He also said he would support a general election if one were called. Tougher gun control laws are being introduced in England to prevent people deemed medically unfit from owning a firearm. A digital flagging system will enable doctors to alert police if patients with firearm certificates develop conditions such as mental health problems or drug or alcohol abuse. Consumer confidence in the economy has hit its lowest point since the start of the pandemic, according to which just 8% think it will improve over the next 12 months, while 78% think it will worsen as the cost of living crisis continues. I said at the start of the programme today we wanted to get you involved. We want to hear your opinions. We have our experts, we have our pundits in the studio. They have their opinions, but what are your opinions? First of all, we're going to go to Linda, who's appeared on the programme before. Linda's in Cheshire. She's a care home worker. Linda, good morning to you. And there beside Linda, you have got Robert McMillan. Robert is retired. He's an active volunteer, though. And again, he is... fair to say, I think, Robert, you're anti-Boris. Linda, you're there in defence of him. Tell us what you want to say about the Prime Minister.
Linda first. I do about the Prime Minister, and I think he's had a very rough time. I think the mainstream media have conducted a witch hunt, and it's been very unedifying to see. I think they should leave Boris to get on with the job. And the one thing I would say in all of this, don't let the mainstream media decide who runs this country, because that's what they're doing. Hold on, let Boris get on with the job, and let's see where we go from here. But don't let the mainstream media decide. It's been ridiculous.
Robert, what would you say to Linda?
I think Boris Johnson has done some good things. First of all, he prevented Corbyn coming to power. That was a relief for the whole nation. He's had to fight the Brexit proposals through with a lot of opposition.
He's led the charge of dealing with the COVID crisis, again, against many difficult decisions. And now he's revered in Ukraine because he's giving great support there to that country. But what we can't have is this continual waking up every day and finding out somebody else has been found out, and politicians being sent out to defend him, often given the wrong briefs. This is making his supporters a laughingstock.
Well, Robert, while you're there, I mean, in the studio, I'm accompanied by Lord Moylan, who has worked with Boris Johnson, very pro Boris Johnson. Norman Baker, who has big doubts and thinks it's time for Boris Johnson to go. So, Lord Moylan, first of all, could you speak to Robert and tell him why you think your man should stay?
All right, well, first of all, my policy is the voters are always right. So I'm not here to argue with Linda and Robert, and I hear what they say, and I think it's very important to hear what they say. I entirely agree with Linda. Robert, I think you've made some very good points about the progress Boris has made on all the big things and being really in the right place and steering the country forward. And I agree with you. It is very disappointing when some of these things come out, and Boris has apologised, that when some of these things come out and you see errors of judgment and then you see people being wrongly briefed and the story comes out wrong and then everyone says everyone's lying and they're all confused, and that needs sorting out. And I thought we had sorted that out, and it shouldn't be happening. So I agree with you entirely about that. But you're right about the big things, the big calls Boris has got right, and that I think he's leading the country in the right direction.
But, Robert, is your mind made up?
Yes, it is at the moment. There's something else as well. Speaking to people who've been dealing with ministers in the past and recently, there seems to be an air of born to rule coming through this government. That is not good. We want people who are there on merit, thinking people, taking the big decisions.
OK. Let's go to Norman Baker. Norman, would you speak to Linda? Linda talks about what she terms the mainstream media. Where do you trust anybody for your news, Linda?
No, I certainly don't trust the newspapers. I don't trust the BBC. I don't trust the mainstream media in general. The journalistic code insists that what is printed has to be fact and not opinion. But every day we find people's opinion is taking precedence over actual fact. Just the other day, Twitter is not real life, I know that, but just the other day I saw on Twitter that GB News had said that every member of the Conservative Party wants Boris to resign. Now, that's simply not true. I'm a member. Nobody's asked me.
OK, let's hear from Norman.
Well, morning, Linda. I think it's disappointing in a way and worrying that you feel that about what you call the mainstream media, because we have in this country a diverse media, which has got many different owners of the newspapers. There's a requirement for balance, which is enforced upon the broadcasters like GB News or the BBC, to make sure that all voices are heard. I don't particularly think the media is a problem here. I mean, let's face the fact that we've had 41%, I think it was, of Conservative MPs themselves voting no confidence in the Prime Minister. That was their view. We've had ministers in the last couple of days resign. The Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Health Secretary have resigned. So this isn't the media. This is actually the Conservative Party that's unhappy with the Prime Minister to a large degree. I appreciate you aren't, but a lot of Conservatives appear to be. And the opinion polls certainly suggest that he's lost confidence in the nation as a whole.
Over to you, Linda.
Yes, I understand your point, but I think a lot of it is driven by the mainstream media. And it's all right saying about free speech and that sort of thing, but there is a left-wing cabal in this country that wants to see Boris Johnson out. They know that they can't beat him in an election, and this is the only way that they feel that they can get rid of him.
Linda, do you think he's going to survive?
I do. I think it's going to be rocky. I think it's going to be very hard over the next few days, perhaps even the next few weeks. I don't think there'll be a general election, not just yet. Rishi Sunak resigning, I think, is an opportunity now, because I know Boris wanted tax cuts and Rishi didn't. So to Boris, I would say, as your boss, I'd like to see tax cuts. I'd like to see the abolition of the green levy. I'd like to see help for small businesses. I'd like to see something done about fuel duty. And a real hobby horse of mine, let's have more grammar schools in lower income areas and let's get this country back on its feet.
Well, Linda, if a vacancy arises, maybe you should apply for it. All very good stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Robert and Linda, got to leave it there. Thank you, because we've got to go to Downing Street. Isabel there reporting for us this morning as to the comings and goings. Isabel, good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you, Eamonn. Eerily quiet still here on Downing Street. They'll be hoping behind that door that they've done enough to steady the ship with the swift appointment of Steve Barclay as the new Health Secretary and, of course, as Nadhim Zahawi as the new Chancellor. But there'll be lots of wranglings and people trying to work out how, if they can, oust the Prime Minister. It's clear, we know, he won't be leaving the number 10 unless he's dragged kicking and screaming. Let's talk about the options available to the rebels, those opposed to the Prime Minister, Tom Harwood. Lots of talk about the 1922 committee. The Prime Minister should really be safe, should have a grace period now following that vote of no confidence about a month ago. It should be another 11 months plain sailing for him. Big election next week of the 1922 committee. Explain how that might affect things for the PM.
Exactly. Under the current rules of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister is safe from any external challenge. The only way that he would go is by voluntarily resigning. However, the current rules may not be in place for that much longer, because over the course of this week's, indeed voting next week, is the 1922 committee executive elections, where the backbenchers of the Conservative Party will vote for those who sit on the committee of the 1922 committee, who can then, amongst that committee, change the rules. It's a very simple process. It doesn't require a supermajority or anything like that. It's 50% plus one of those on the executive of the 1922 could say that another vote is possible under their rules, and indeed many people are standing for that committee on an explicit manifesto of changing those rules.
Risk of that, though, it could destabilise future premierships, and presumably there'd be some who'd be cautious about doing that.
No doubt there are lots of small c Conservatives in the Conservative Party. Having arbitrary change of rules is a pretty profound thing to do. However, one note of caution on that, it was indeed the threat of a change of rules that did for Theresa May back in 2019. She only went of her own accord after several members of the executive of the 22 said, we're ready to change the rules unless you go.
OK, Tom, thank you very much. Well, in terms of the 1922 committee, then all calm for at least a week, we think. But in terms of the Prime Minister's got PMQs and the liaison committee this afternoon. Lots of difficult questions for him, Eamonn.
It's posted, Isabel. We'll be back to you very, very shortly. Right now, we're going to take a break, and we've got the weather picture, and then after that, the top of the hour, we'll continue to bring you the latest from Downing Street as Boris Johnson decides whether to hold on to power or not.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A breezy day to come with some rain in the north, brighter skies further south with some sunshine for the far south of the UK, and feeling much warmer compared to recent days. High pressure is extending its influence across the southern half of the UK, but an area of low pressure is moving close to the north of Scotland, bringing some weather fronts with it, and that's why it is breezy, cloudy, and in some places wet across northern parts of the country. So for really northern Scotland, western Scotland, outbreaks of rain continuing through the morning into the early afternoon. The rain more on and off eastern Scotland, northern England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, petering out by the afternoon. But there is a gusty wind, and that's going to make it feel cool in the north. A complete contrast further south, 21 to 27 degrees with plenty of sunny spells. A sunnier day, in fact, compared to yesterday. And the cloud and the breeze in the north, well, that does push a little further south overnight, but the rain also peters out. The cloud develops some holes in it. However, we do have a relatively humid airflow now, and that means that it's going to be a mild or warm night in places, 16 or 17 degrees in the south, 12 to 14 degrees further north. A keen breeze runs down the North Sea on Thursday. That'll make it feel a bit cooler, and I think actually for many it's a cloudy start to the day. But As the day continues, the cloud will tend to lift and break up. Some decent sunny spells will break out, particularly for central and western areas. And for Scotland, certainly a brighter day with much less rain, but still some dampness in the far northwest. 16 Celsius in the Western Isles, 19 for Glasgow, 22 to 24 for southern parts of the UK. Friday is looking brighter and drier for many, plenty of sunshine around. Saturday is looking fine as well, and temperatures will rise.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Prime Minister's future hangs in the balance as two of his most senior ministers resign. A very good morning to you. 7 o'clock is the time, or well, it's 2 minutes past, actually. I lied to you, but then doesn't everybody these days? Wednesday, the 6th of July. This is Breakfast on GB News with me, Eamonn, Holmes in the studio, and Isabel, Webster at Downing Street, leading the news this morning. Only one story.
I'm live in Downing Street all morning as we assess the impact on what was quite frankly a seismic night for the Prime Minister as he lost his Chancellor and his Health Secretary. Sajid Javid saying the government was no longer acting in the national interest. We'll be asking how much longer the Prime Minister can hold on to the keys to the famous door behind me.
The PM has moved quickly to replace those guys, promoting the Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi to Chancellor and former Chief of Staff Steve Barclay to Health Secretary. This comes ahead of elections to the 1922 Committee Executive, the body which will decide if another vote of no confidence can be held within the next few weeks. You have been joining in, and thanks for your comments, so keep them coming in at GB Views at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet at GB News as well. Reaction pouring into all of this. I'm joined in the studio by David Mellor. We've got Michael Brown here as well, and we have got Norman Baker. And just what we're seeing here, there is a lot of love out there for Boris Johnson, guys. It may disappoint you to hear. David Mellor, can you understand why there's love for him?
No, I don't object to there being love for him. And I'm sure they can love him in retirement or when he starts to make a fortune.
You definitely think he's going?
Oh, of course he's going. How much are we going to bet on this? Mystic Mellor knows.
Mystic Mellor knows.
Mystic Mellor knows.
What about Michael Brown?
I do feel uncomfortable that prime ministers who get elected by the people with an overall majority of 80, similarly Margaret Thatcher in 1987 got a similar majority, I do feel uncomfortable when it is not to be the voters who will get rid of Boris Johnson. But we are a parliamentary democracy, and I agree absolutely with David. I'm afraid that Boris Johnson will be removed by Tory members of Parliament, if not in the next 3 weeks, certainly by the party conference, and I'll come in here at Christmas and eat a hat of icing cake if I do have to eat a hat.
Norman Baker?
Well, sorry to be making an obscure constitutional point, but of course we don't have a presidential system, so therefore the country elected their individual MPs in their constituencies and elected a party overall rather than necessarily voting for the Prime Minister. So it's perfectly legitimate and quite normal, actually, for the Prime Minister to be removed during a Parliament. So, for example, Gordon Brown replacing Tony Blair, that was a resignation at that particular point. But nevertheless, it can happen and life carries on. So I don't think that should be the determining factor. Yes, there is love out there for Boris Johnson, but I'm also concerned that people think this is somehow a witch hunt. Some of the people who've written in or given comments, Eamonn, Hazel, for example, thinks nothing but a witch hunt. I don't think it's a witch hunt. I think that there's serious issues about how the Prime Minister behaved, and that's reflected in the way that his own party has responded to him.
I mean, could we deal with this witch hunt point? Because he appoints a man who is known to behave utterly discreditably to be Deputy Chief Whip. He then lies about what he knew about this man. He has to be called out by the former Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office, who says he knew about these allegations and he knew that those allegations have been found proved. I just think it's not a witch hunt to expect, to appoint that man to be Deputy Chief Whip is an insult to British politics.
You're talking about morals, you're talking about principles, you're talking about...
I'm talking about crime,
criminal
behaviour.
There are an awful lot of people watching this morning for whom Boris Johnson, if he is telling lies, does not matter to them because they're worried about Ukraine, they're worried about cost of living.
Look, let's put the side for the defence. The side for Boris Johnson's, the strongest card is that he secured a massive majority for the Conservative Party at the last election. That is a great achievement because we had governments, minority governments, throughout the Cameron period, apart from 2 years, and Theresa May's period. Nothing could get done. What is so tragic is that this talented person, who was an outstanding mayor of London, displayed and I think David will have seen him at close quarters as London mayor. I had high hopes for him, and unfortunately, it's crisis to crisis to crisis, and the very strength of character, which has been his electoral success, are the faults he has are also his greatest his assets are his same faults.
Can I just quickly say, I'm not against him with a lot of what he does. I think the tragedy for Boris is that there's an element of Boris that actually destroys the effectiveness of the good things about Boris. I think he's had a great war in terms of Ukraine, but there comes a point when you simply can't go on blustering and lying, and he's been caught out.
And the other side of the coin, Eamonn, is David and I both came into Parliament, part of the Thatcher Revolution in 1979, 43 years ago, and it was inflation that got us elected because of the disastrous financial policies of the Callaghan-Wilson government. And unfortunately, Boris has taken his eye off the ball with regard to the inflation that we've got. It's not going to be 11% in a year's time. It's probably going to be nearer 15%.
So much more to talk about, trying to reflect your views or indeed visiting your homes this morning, taking Zoom calls for you, whether you are pro-Boris or anti-Boris. Right now, Downing Street, Isabel Webster there for us this morning. Isabel.
Good morning to you, Eamonn. Really eerily quiet here still, just after 7 o'clock. About 13 hours since this, political earthquake really shook Downing Street last night with, as you've just been discussing, Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak handing in their resignations. I just want to pick up on a couple of the points Michael Wood and Norman Baker were making with you just then, with our political correspondent Tom Harwood here, reflecting on the deference that the former Chancellor, made in that letter to the Prime Minister, saying that he had real respect effect for that mandate, and that led to compromises and these private disagreements. Interesting, though, the points that were being made by the panel in the studio about this being a parliamentary system as opposed to a presidential system, and it all then hinges, doesn't it, particularly on Conservative MPs in the 1922 committee.
It certainly does, and it's absolutely right to say that, of course, we're a parliamentary democracy. Of course, we have no presidential system. However, the system has felt more and more presidential as the years have gone on. Of course, we have leaders' debates. One of the great arguments against these televised debates between the party leaders was because it's eking towards a presidential style system that we're sort of muddying the water in terms of where the mandate lies. Is it with Parliament? Is it with the people? Of course, that was a big argument of the last Parliament, something that brought the last Parliament to a conclusion, in fact. But no, fascinating to see the content of those letters. Sajid Javid clearly writing his on the day. However, Rishi Sunak's may well have been written earlier indeed. It's interesting to see that it came out sort of 10 minutes after Sajid Javid's letter. It was undated, and indeed it referenced a more general concern, indeed talking about a speech that had been long delayed, a joint economic speech between what was to be the Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Chancellor then Rishi Sunak, aiming to deal with the cost of living crisis. We've been having this speech briefed to us for the last over a month, and it has not materialised. Of course, it had been delayed until next week. That's when we were going to expect it. And Rishi Sunak saying in his letter that he simply couldn't countenance delivering that there were too many private disagreements, although standing by the Prime Minister in public as collective responsibility of the Cabinet demands.
Yeah, and look, there have been lots of suspicions that there were tensions between the pair, hadn't there? Not least in the wake of some of the private matters and Rishi Sunak's own life coming to the fore and sort of undermining his own authority. How much of a blow is it, though, for the Prime Minister to lose a Chancellor at this stage when he's already on unsteady ground? Can he withstand this, given everything that we know about Teflon Boris, if you like, the fact that he might be well licking his wounds today, but he'll come out fighting at PMQs, won't he, and then at the Liaison Committee this afternoon?
I think there's no doubt that he'll come out fighting at Prime Minister's questions and at the Liaison Committee. We've seen how quickly he responded to these resignations, plugging the gaps as quickly as he could. I'm reminded of sort of imagining a ship sailing through very stormy waters, and these holes keep getting blasted through the side, and Boris is trying to cork them up as quickly as possible. But ultimately, how many more holes will there be peppering the side of his ship? It may become impossible to get that cork in place.
Yeah, and just quickly on that theme, you know, Nadhim Zahawi and indeed Steve Barclay, both heavyweights, pretty good corks to be plugging the holes with.
Certainly. Nadhim Zahawi, of course, had huge plaudits for being the vaccines minister who delivered that world-beating vaccine rollout, one of the great successes of this administration. Indeed, he then became Education Secretary, a really heavyweight position. Steve Barclay has held a number of positions in the Cabinet, of course. He was Brexit Secretary, he's been in the Home Office, he has been the Chief of Staff to Boris Johnson since the reorganisation of Downing Street. However, it's that reorganisation of Downing Street that seems to have unstuck this premiership, because he can no longer say this is a problem with the structure, because he's changed the structure. It starts to look more like it's a problem with the Prime Minister.
And we're still waiting to hear for a replacement for Steve Barclay, the Chief of Staff. There are lots of other more junior resignations that happened in a sort of dominoes effect last night. So we're expecting some movement this morning, and of course we will reflect that just as soon as we see any new faces or old faces walking up and down this famous street. Do you think the Prime Minister's out of hot water in terms of any more cabinet members? I mean, lots of people coming out and declaring in his support last night. But that's not to say today's a new day. Things could change. They do very quickly around here.
Things do move incredibly quickly, and it's almost a fool's errand to try and make predictions. However, you'd be a brave cabinet minister to have said, I'm sticking by the Prime Minister last night, only to then U-turn this morning. I think those names who have clearly said that they are staying in the boat are going to have egg on their face were they to resign now. I think really there'll be some tricky moments over the next few days, maybe some private pressure. Of course, it was private pressure that got Margaret Thatcher to stand down after she won not by 15%, not by that supermajority, just a simple majority won her confidence vote. there may well be private pressure placed on the Prime Minister today, public pressure from non-cabinet sources, but ultimately next Wednesday, that's when the 1922 committee is elected. That could be the day when everything moves.
We've had £1 for every time we've said that in the last 6 months. Tom Harwood, thank you very much indeed. So back to you, Eamonn. Any developments from Downing Street, we'll be bringing them straight to your door.
Time approaching 7:15. Let's bring you up to date. Here's what's happening news-wise. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, now says the government is collapsing and Boris Johnson is unfit to govern. He also said he would support a general election if one were called. Tougher gun control laws are being introduced in England to prevent people deemed medically unfit from owning a firearm. A digital flagging system will enable doctors to alert police if patients with firearm certificates develop conditions such as mental health problems or drug or alcohol abuse. And Cameron Norrie has made it through to the semi-finals at Wimbledon. He battled through 5 sets on court number 1 to beat Belgium's David Goffin and is the only British player left in the tournament. It's the first time the 26-year-old has reached the last 4 of the Grand Slam in his career. Norrie will face Novak Djokovic on Friday. We're out and about, we're all over the country. This is GB News. You're listening to us on radio, watching us on television. We are the People's News Channel, live from Sajid Javid's constituency in Bromsgrove very shortly to find out what his constituents make of his resignation. All that to come. First, the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A breezy day to come with some rain in the north, brighter skies further south with some sunshine for the far south of the UK, and feeling much warmer compared to recent days. High pressure is extending its influence across the southern half of the UK, but an area of low pressure is moving close to the north of Scotland, bringing some weather fronts with it, and that's why it is breezy, cloudy, and in some places wet across northern parts of the country. So for really northern Scotland, western Scotland, outbreaks of rain continuing through the morning into the early afternoon. The rain more on and off eastern Scotland, northern England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, petering out by the afternoon. But there is a gusty wind, and that's going to make it feel cool in the north. A complete contrast further south, 21 to 27 degrees with plenty of sunny spells. A sunnier day, in fact, compared to yesterday. And the cloud and the breeze in the north, well, that does push a little further south overnight, but the rain also peters out. The cloud develops some holes in it. However, we do have a relatively humid airflow now, and that means that it's going to be a mild or warm night in places, 16 or 17 degrees in the south, 12 to 14 degrees further north. A keen breeze runs down the North Sea on Thursday. That'll make it feel a bit cooler, and I think actually for many it's a cloudy start to the day. But as the day continues, the cloud will tend to lift and break up. Some decent sunny spells will break out, particularly for central and western areas. And for Scotland, certainly a brighter day with much less rain, but still some dampness in the far northwest. 16 Celsius in the Western Isles, 19 for Glasgow, 22 to 24 for southern parts of the UK. Friday is looking brighter and drier for many, plenty of sunshine around. Saturday is looking fine as well, and temperatures will rise.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It's 7:20. Thanks for your company on this Wednesday morning. You're tuned into breakfast here on GB News with me, Eamonn Holmes. It's the morning after the double cabinet resignations of Rishi Sunak and the Health Secretary Sajid Javid. Joining me now in studio, David Miller, Michael Brown and Norman Baker. Norman, we're dealing with a lot of comments, guys, and I want your opinions on it. So there's a lot of you getting in touch, and thank you. You can join the discussion, as it says here on this, the People's News channel. Kenneth comments, this is the 90s all over again, and you guys will be very good to talk about this. The Tories are self-imploding from a position of strength, handing the keys of the UK back to Labour. God help us if Starmer becomes PM. Discuss.
Well, indeed. I mean, the thing about that analysis from Kenneth is that I think it goes to the heart of where the Tory MPs are, because what they'll be concentrating on predominantly is actually not the ethics of Boris Johnson. It's whether or not he's going to win them the next election or whether he isn't. That's actually what's in their minds. And obviously he came up as Prime Minister with a majority of 80 at the last general election. He was seen to be a vote winner. That's why he was elected in the first place. I think a lot of Tory MPs and Tory members, in fact, up and down the country, David and Michael will tell us if that's correct or not, voted for Boris, not because he thought he was the best thing since sliced bread, but because they thought he was going to win the election for them, which he duly did. And the issue is now, can he win another election? Well, he's tanking in the opinion polls, and I think that's driving a lot of the unhappiness on the Conservative benches. And as far as Labour's concerned, which Kenneth also refers to, well, I mean, the Labour Party's policy appears to be to do nothing very much, to keep as quiet as possible and wait to win the election by default, which is not a very honourable position in my view. And it's also a dangerous one, because if the Prime Minister is replaced by somebody else, then what happens then if that person then becomes popular and there's no proper opposition in place? Because Starmer's been rather complacent about the situation which is before him. And I think back to when Margaret Thatcher went, and Michael and David will know this better than I will, though I was researching the Commons at the time, is John Major was suddenly appeared from nowhere and won an election in 92. So all the damage that had been done by Mrs Thatcher in the elector's eyes was kind of wiped out, and they started afresh with a blank sheet of paper.
The 90s, is this the 90s all over again?
Well, there are certainly similarities. We've got a situation whereby members of Parliament who won seats that had never been won by any previous leader of the party. Margaret Thatcher didn't win a load of these seats in the North East. So I perfectly accept and I'm very sympathetic to the fact that this Prime Minister has achieved the Red Wall revolution. But those people hang by a thread with tiny majorities, like I had in 1979 when I became the first Tory MP in over half a century to win Scunthorpe with a majority of 400 votes. So all those Tory MPs and a lot of Tory MPs with 10,000, 20,000 seats like Lewis that Norman used to represent are ripe for the picking for Liberal Democrats. So the calculation is Boris going to hold me my seat at the next election?
That's right.
Bluntly.
But the 90s is very different. The 90s, a clapped-out Conservative government got a new lease of life because John Major appeared to offer something different. And then he was blown off course by what happened to leaving the ERM, the exchange rate mechanism, and all the rest of it. And even though by the time we got to the 97 election, the economy was doing very well, thanks to Ken Clarke as Chancellor, Tories got no benefit
yes,
for that whatsoever.
The irony was the economy of the United Kingdom between 1992 and 1997 was handed over as a golden inheritance to Tony Blair, but we got no credit for it whatsoever.
That's right. But I think this is a very different situation where, look, history will show that Boris Johnson threw it all away. He had a magic meeting with the British public. They elected him. If he'd settled down to be a conventional Prime Minister, taking conventional steps to try to change the way that the Conservative Party ran itself to deal with the post-Brexit potential, it would have been very good. But, of course, Boris is not really a Conservative. You have to remember that. So the moment we hit
what is he?
He's a sort of Boris nationalist, but he's basically a tax and spend socialist, you see. At the end of the day,
That is my worry about
Boris thinks that the problems of this country can be solved by chucking public money at them. Now, myself, my generation, if that had been the answer, there would be statues to Harold Wilson and Dennis Healey on every village green.
Inferred in Rishi Sunak's resignation letter yesterday.
Yes.
And I want now to, we're going to go live. We're going to go to Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, former Health Secretary, who resigned last night just after 6 o'clock as well. His constituency is Bromsgrove. Let's go there. Will Hollis reporting from there for us this morning. Will.
Good morning. Yeah, Bromsgrove. This is Sajid Javid's constituency. It's a very quiet constituency at the moment because nobody's up yet, nobody's out heading to work. There's one or two people walking along, so I haven't had a chance to really speak to anyone yet about how they're feeling, but we know certainly how the former Health Secretary is feeling. He hasn't done an interview since last night when he put on his Twitter that he was resigning. One of the things that he said was that the tone you set as leader, this is directed to the Prime Minister, and the values you represent reflect on your colleagues, your party, and ultimately the country. He also said that Conservatives are at their best, are seen as hard-headed decision makers, guided by strong values, and while they're not always popular, he says that we've been competent in acting, but what he says now is that the public don't find them popular and they don't think that they're competent. That's one of the reasons why he resigned yesterday. Now, Sajid Javid, he's held a variety of different cabinet positions over the last 12 years since he was elected in 2010, but this is his recent resignation. It came at the same time as now the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak handed in his resignation, both around that same time. Around 6 o'clock. So now we're going to see what might happen. Journalists in the newsroom and certainly watching on Twitter, we're always looking for these signs of if cabinet ministers go, what might happen afterwards. And I think that's what a lot of people are going to be looking at right now. If it's going to be a bit of a house of cards that start to tumble, dominoes one by one fall in, to see two big resignations like this, it is quite a significant thing. But one of the things that we've been hearing about is that the Prime Minister is bullish this morning. He's confident. He's got his team rallying around him. He's filled those two positions. There's Nadeem Zahawi and Steve Barclay as well. And so he's seeing that he's grouping people around him really quickly. I'm sorry about that lady there who's just walking past. But now we're going to see what happens afterwards, the fallout from this. And while it is a really nice, quiet high street right now, when it does start to get a little bit busier, I'm going to speak to people about how they feel that their MP is in the headlines again today.
Look, when we next come back to you, Will, it'll be really, really interesting to see how people judge their MP, Sajid Javid, as a result of what he did yesterday. So you get on the ball with that. We'll speak to you again very shortly. Thank you very much indeed. Gentlemen, Sajid Javid's resignation letter, in it, he says about Boris Johnson, the tone you set as a leader and the values you represent reflect on your colleagues, your party, and ultimately the country. Conservatives are at their best when they're seen as hard-headed decision makers, guided by strong values. We may not always have been popular, but we have been competent in acting in the national interest. Sadly, in the current circumstances, the public are concluding that we are neither. Which
on the money.
Right.
I mean, completely on the money. I'd have loved to have crafted that paragraph myself, because that sums it all up. Boris is not to be trusted, and Boris is not able to actually steer the ship of state in a direction that any true Conservative would want it to go.
Could he change it, Michael, if he wanted to? Is he capable of changing it?
No, he said last week, didn't he, after the last scandal, I can't remember what it was, he said, I'm not going to change. Partygate, it's something to do with Partygate. But Boris cannot change. Boris is Boris, and Boris will always be Boris. And it is such a tragedy, because I'm very, very sympathetic to the achievements of him securing a full 5-year term for the Conservative Party. But we're at the point where it's out of his hands, because what is going to happen next week is there's going to be elections for the 1922 executive, which are confined solely to people who are not ministers of the Crown. So no cabinet ministers, under-secretaries of paperclips, ministers of state can vote. It's only the backbenchers. We know that there's largely 140 or so backbenchers, maybe one or two ministers secretly voted against Boris. They will choose the executive, and there are going to be two slates, pro-Boris slate and an anti-Boris slate. They will then, I think, get to the grips with changing the rules to allow for another ballot, and that is probably the way it will come to a grisly end before the summer recess. To my regret, because I don't like seeing Prime Ministers put out on the street by anybody except voters.
Tight timetable.
Well, I think Michael's analysis is correct, but I think if Boris, in his own interest and for his own self-respect, ought to probably go before he's pushed. I mean, it's very unedifying to be pushed out in that particular way, but it will happen. I think undoubtedly his days are numbered.
OK. Gentlemen, for the moment, thank you all very much indeed. Keep your views coming in. Very shortly, we're going to be going through the newspapers. David Miller staying on for that. Sam Lister, who's the political editor of the Daily Express, talking to both of them with what the papers are saying right after this. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Let's bring you up to date. 7:33 is the time, and the Brexit Minister Lord Frost has joined calls for Boris Johnson to resign, saying the Prime Minister risks bringing the government down with him if he hangs on. It comes after Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid stepped down as Chancellor and Health Secretary. Police have recorded an 84% rise in online grooming crimes in the last 4 years, with the NSPCC saying there have been more than 27,000 offences since 2017. The government is now planning to give the regulator Ofcom more power to make platforms such as Facebook and Snapchat do more to tackle abuse. Petrol prices have hit another record high. According to the RAC, in June, the average cost of a litre of fuel rose by more than 16 pence to 191.4. David Mellor, you know, is in the studio with us today. He's one of our special guests, and Sam Lister is the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Express. And Sam, we go to the Daily Telegraph, and this is Lord Frost saying that Boris Johnson is not the leader we need.
Yeah, like Lord Frost has been, in the past, a close ally of Boris Johnson, but over recent months he's really parted ways with Boris Johnson. I think it's an ideological thing for him. He feels that Boris Johnson is almost spending on a socialist level. He wants to go back to traditional Conservative spending policies. And he does say that the Prime Minister's a remarkable man, and he does praise him, but he says, actually, you know, he's no longer the man for the job.
Yeah. This is a theme that is popping up. You raised this only a few moments ago. The former Chancellor, two former Chancellors who resigned last night, basically saying the same thing, that he's not a Conservative-minded, as regards spending Prime Minister.
You see, what he does is throw money at problems, which was the Labour way. And, you know, he had the cheek to say that now that Sunak was out of the way, he'd be able to concentrate on a tax-cutting agenda. But the problem is, and I love as an ex-Treasury Minister pointed out to him, that you cut taxes as a thank you present to people for them having accepted that you have to keep public expenditure under control. Public expenditure is not under control, and Rishi Sunak takes a lot of the blame for that. And so on top of a public spending deficit, which is frightening, and where it's now, nearly £90 billion that we spend on servicing our debt, and that is before international interest rate goes up. For him then to say, but, you know, I'm going to cut taxes, for him it's a slogan. It's not a belief, and it's not a carefully thought-through policy. That's his problem.
Rishi Sunak will agree with you, and you'll agree with what he's saying in his resignation letter. Sunak last night saying, our country is facing immense challenges. We both want a low-tax, high-growth economy and world-class public services, but this can only be responsibly delivered if we are prepared to work hard, make sacrifices and take difficult decisions. I firmly believe the public are ready to hear the truth. Our people know that if something is too good to be true, then it's not true. So he is saying that we're being lied to.
Well, we are being lied to. Boris is when you look at all the explanations he puts, these poor souls who go on breakfast TV, you know, as representatives of the government, and they lie through their teeth. They must know they're lying. And then when the game changes, he gets someone to go and tell a different lie. I mean, this is a shameless person. We have to remember this. Boris is a shameless person. But there's an irony here, because all the big lies he's told, he then ends up by appointing this ridiculous person as Deputy Chief Whip. And that brings him down, which reminds me of Al Capone, you know. Al Capone did all manner of dreadful things, but Al Capone got caught out by doing a dishonest tax return. And that's what brought Al Capone down. And Boris is going to miss out because he thought that having a guy in charge of party discipline who, you know, groped young men in London clubs, that would be all right. And, of course, it isn't all right. And that's ultimately what's going to bring him down, or at least is precipitating the bringing down of Boris Johnson.
Sam, talking about losing out, how can Labour possibly lose out if a general election was called? 10-point lead, 42% support. Is it theirs to throw away?
Absolutely. But we saw with Theresa May, she had a 20-point lead, and look what happened there. I don't think this is nailed on for Labour by any means. And I think Boris Johnson, we know that his talent is campaigning. So I think it's not quite as simple as Labour would hope. And I don't think they actually believe that it's nailed on either. So for all Keir Starmer's calls for a snap election, I think really actually Labour aren't quite ready yet to go to the country and fight this battle.
And explain to us how a general election could actually be a really good thing for Boris Johnson, couldn't it? I mean, if he lost the support of his cabinet or whatever, he suddenly returned the Conservatives with another big majority.
Yeah, a new mandate, fresh mandate, and that would be a great thing for him. But obviously, getting there is quite a big battle. I would say, speaking to backbenchers yesterday, obviously he has lost more loyalists, but there are still people who still fully believe in him. And they say, actually, despite all this, we still think he's the best person to lead us to, if not victory, to less of a defeat than any other candidate. So they see that actually he's still a better option for them electorally than any of the other people who are around.
Sorry, I was just hearing there were just interviews and things buzzing in, coming in all the time. Just sort of took my mind away what we're doing. Keir Starmer, right? Well, outline to people how this week could go drastically wrong. We had Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Attorney General, on yesterday, very confident that Keir Starmer is not going to be charged. He is very confident, anytime he spoke, that he's not going to be charged unless they know something the rest of us don't. What does the future hold for him?
Well, Boris Johnson was very confident he wasn't going to be charged. Rishi Sunak was very confident he wasn't going to be charged, and they both were given fixed penalty notices by the police for breaking lockdown rules. So, you know, the Labour Party can have all the confidence it wants, but until the police rule, it doesn't now.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there is this big threat over Keir Starmer. He, you know, he could be out within weeks, potentially. He has made a promise to quit if he is fined. And until the police come back, you know, his position is actually pretty much as precarious as Boris Johnson's.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get clarification. Were you telling me there that Steve Reid is available? Let's go to Steve Reid now. If Steve Reid is there, we'll go to Steve Reid. Just, guys, while you're here, we can hear what he has to say. Steve Reid is the Shadow Communities and Local Government Secretary, and he's joined us there from Westminster, I believe, this morning. Steve, good morning to you.
Good morning, Eamonn. I'm actually at home and I'm now the Shadow Justice Secretary, but it's great to be with you anyway.
Oh, good man, good man. Listen, I just want to know what you feel, Steve, in terms of a general election. Would it really be in your favour for one to be called very soon?
Well, I think it would be in the country's interests, actually, because we need, after these past, it's nearly been a year now, scandal after scandal after scandal. This country desperately needs new leadership. Now, first of all, we have the Owen Paterson scandal, when Boris Johnson tried to change the rules over inappropriate and rule-breaking lobbying. Then we had Partygate scandal, when Boris Johnson was mocking the sacrifices of the British people by allowing parties to be held at 10 Downing Street. Now we've had the Pincher scandal, where Boris Johnson promoted somebody despite knowing that he had been accused and admitted to being a predatory sexual abuser. All of this is absolutely shocking. And what it's involved the government in doing, and Conservative ministers in doing, is touring the TV studios, covering up Boris Johnson's lies and law-breaking, all of which means they're not focusing on the real priorities of the British people, which is the cost of living crisis. Right now, we've got the highest rates of inflation for 30 years, the highest levels of personal taxation for 50 years, the worst decade for wage growth since the Great Depression in the 1930s, and the government's priority is covering up Boris Johnson's lies and law-breaking. And quite frankly, this cannot go on. The British people deserve better than this.
Well, look, one of the things I know that you wanted to talk about, Steve, was about scamming. And I talked to Emily Thornberry about this yesterday. And you just believe in terms of new technology and scamming, people are being left unprotected. There's not enough law. There's not enough attention being paid to this sort of thing. And I'm going to quote you here. And you say you accuse the Conservatives of waving the white flag to scammers. But there's no white flag over number 10, is there, at the moment?
Well, I mean, what we're speaking about here, this is one of those issues that increasingly is of importance and a genuine threat to British people. But the Conservatives have done nothing about it because they're not focused on the British people. They're focused on saving their own skins. And to put it in a nutshell, over the last 10 years, the number of reports to the police of online fraud has gone up 1,000%. But the number of prosecutions in court has gone down by 3/4. And that's because the government has cut police, they've cut investment in fraud teams that could be identifying this, and they've closed down the courts. And people are losing online to scammers thousands of pounds now. We even had Kwasi Kwarteng, one of the government's ministers, the Secretary of State for Business, going on the TV and telling people that fraud didn't really matter because it wasn't a real crime. It's actually the biggest form of crime in our country today, but we've got a government that doesn't care about it. They're too focused on covering up for Boris Johnson's lies and law breaking to deal with the things that matter to the British people. And that is why we're saying this country desperately needs new leadership. Now, there doesn't have to be a general election, Eamonn, for another 2 years. That is in the gift of the Prime Minister. But the rumours at Westminster, circulating in the Tory end of the tea rooms, is that the Prime Minister, to save his own skin, if he feels he's going to be deposed, may call the snap general election. Well, that will then put the ball in the court of the British people. And I think given the misery and the indignity that this debased Prime Minister has heaped on our country over these last few years, they will take their own view about who they want to be running the country and taking us forward into the future.
But Steve, the Conservatives may not be the only party having to deal with new leadership. I was talking here to Sam Lister, who's the Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Express, in the studio, and we were pondering what could happen to Keir Starmer. This week he said he will resign if he gets a summons. So is this an active topic of conversation? It has to be, and a concern within your own party.
Well, it would be if he got a fixed penalty notice rather than a summons. But the point you're making there is the point of difference between Keir Starmer's Labour Party and Boris Johnson's Conservatives, because the Conservatives believe the laws are for the little people and that it's fine for the Prime Minister to break the law and then get away with it. Keir Starmer and the Labour Party believe that the law should apply to everybody. And if he was found to have been in breach of those lockdown rules, then he would resign as leader of the Labour Party. One party believes in the rule of law, the other party believes they're above the law. And again, what a point of difference that would be to the British people. I don't believe Keir's going to get a fine. From what I know about what happened in Durham, it was a work event, seems pretty clear to me. But if the police decided otherwise and issued a fixed penalty notice, well, Keir said what he will do. And he's right to do that, because all of us in public life, in Parliament, have to uphold the rule of law. To the Tories, it doesn't matter. You can break it at will. The laws are for the little people, and we cannot go on with a government like that because it breaches trust in government, which is what this debased Conservative government has been doing.
Steve, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, he may well be in Downing Street this morning, watching his telly, listening to his radio, and hearing you. What would you say to him as he sits there and ponders whether to make up his mind on staying or going?
I think Boris Johnson is absolutely shameless, and for the good of the country now, so that Parliament, the government, all of us can focus on what really matters to the British people, the cost of living crisis, perhaps above all. He needs to get out of the way, and we desperately need new leadership.
I think David Miller's itching to ask you something here.
Well, I think the interesting thing is that, be careful what you wish for. If Boris Johnson goes, and by the way, I'm probably even less of a fan of Boris Johnson than you are, so we unite in his unsuitability. But if he goes and some nice person that your mother, whose mother is proud of him or her, becomes leader, most of the foxes that you're trying to shoot will be shot for you, won't they? And that's going to leave you having to mount an election campaign, potential run up to an election, without Boris to blame for everything. It's not an enviable situation, is it?
Yeah, well, we agree on Boris, for sure. I'm not sure I agree with the rest of what you're saying, because I think this has gone on for so long now. It was the entire cabinet who covered up for Boris Johnson while he was lying, while he was breaking the law, while he was mocking the sacrifices of the British people during the lockdown. And it was the Tory parliamentary party who rallied round him just a few weeks ago when they had a vote of confidence. And Boris Johnson was able to walk out of that meeting claiming he had a fresh mandate from his own MPs. So I'm afraid he's a debased Prime Minister, but he's debased his party, and they've backed him, I'm afraid. So whoever they elect as leader will be held to account. And they've all been part, leave aside the scandals, David, they've all been part of a government that has ended up giving us the highest rates of personal taxation for 50 years, highest rates of inflation for 30 years, and the lowest growth of any country, any of the major 20 economies in the world, apart from Russia, which is subject to major international sanctions. They've all got that round their necks. So, if there's an election, I think we stand a good chance with that record to oppose.
Steve, got to leave it there. Thanks for your time this morning. Steve Reid, Labour MP there. The time now 12 minutes before 8 o'clock. Let's bring you up to date with the news situation. And the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the government is collapsing and Boris Johnson is unfit to govern. He's also said he would support a general election if one were called. Tougher gun control laws are being introduced in England to prevent people deemed medically unfit from owning a firearm. A digital flagging system will enable doctors to alert police if patients with firearm certificates develop conditions such as mental health problems or drug or alcohol abuse. And consumer confidence in the economy has hit its lowest point since the start of the pandemic. According to Which magazine, just 8% think it will improve over the next 12 months, while 78% think it will worsen as the cost of living crisis continues. Let's go back to our newspaper reviewers today. Sam Lister's the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Express. We have a new Chancellor, and that Chancellor is a businessman, and he is Nadhim Zahawi, and he took over from Rishi Sunak. Are you surprised with that appointment? Are you surprised he took the appointment? And what have you got to say about him?
Yeah, well, he's been speaking actually in the last kind of half an hour, and he has been asked, do you have faith in Boris Johnson's integrity? And he absolutely insists he does. I guess you couldn't take that job if you didn't.
Yes.
It's a very canny move by Boris Johnson because he
neuters him.
Exactly. Yeah. But also, you know, Nadhim Zahawi, he is a very successful businessman. He will be, I'm sure, a very competent Chancellor. And at this time of cost of living crisis, the country needs somebody who he is serious, and he's a serious person to be in that job.
Could I chip in a word or two about Nadhim, who I've known, well over 30 years? Nadhim's first big business success was buying in T-shirts from America. And as you got hotter, the shirts changed colour. So this is man of rare genius.
Those.
Yes, and it was him. Then, of course, he set up YouGov. And I remember saying to him, with my typical perception, why do you want to go into politics? You're doing so well in business. Anyway, after a slow start, and it took them ages to discover his capability, he has now shot to the top. The issue really is, will it do him any good being Chancellor under Boris? And I think the answer is it depends how long Boris goes on. I suspect, though he would never say so, he must be assuming that, the wreckage of Boris will be swept away and he'll be in a good position as Chancellor. What he won't want to do is have to try and introduce any kind of budget with Boris lurking around. Because Boris does not do mathematics, you see. Mm-hmm. Boris does not do mathematics. He doesn't know, really, that you have to actually give people back money when you've actually got money to give back. That's not quite how it works.
Well, when David says that Mr. Zahawi putting himself in a good position, I presume he means in terms of eventual leadership. What are his chances and what has he done to those politically by accepting the Chancellor role?
Well, he's a very strong contender, and he's got a very strong record in government of actually delivering things rather than just talking about things. Obviously, he was in charge of the vaccine rollout. That went very well. He's got schools back on track in his role as Education Secretary. So he's got a really strong record, and people like him, and he's good on TV. That matters. He's personable, presentable. That all matters. In the long term, with the party, I think he can pitch it to people as actually the country was in a dire state economically, and I stepped up and I did my bit for the country. And I think that's how I would pitch it to the party if I were him.
Yeah. Sunak and Javid, would you expect them to be throwing their hats into the ring as future leaders?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah? Obviously, Rishi Sunak, he was the rising star, and it was almost a dead cert that he was the next man to take the job. He's a Brexiteer, so, he's got very good credentials on that score. But obviously, his stock took a bit of a tumble when the row about the non-dom status of his wife emerged. So that did dent him. But I think his resignation, he can win over some of the One Nation Tories and bring that part of the party in. So I don't think he's out of the running. He's certainly a contender.
I want to ask both of you, as if this was the Grand National or the Derby or something. Let's go through some of the runners and riders. Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister.
I mean, knacker's yard.
Seriously.
Yeah, they're knacker's yard.
Yeah.
If I was a knacker, I'd be look forward to dealing with. Look, Dominic Raab is a classic example of a Boris appointment to his cabinet. There is no basis when you look at Dominic Raab's past why he should be even in the cabinet, let alone deputy prime minister. He was given the job of being a foreign secretary. He made a total mess of it, preferring to stay on holiday than coming back and dealing with serious issues. He is a classic example of a cabinet where Boris doesn't care whether they're actually any good at their job. What he cares about is whether they are loyal to him.
Right.
I would say, actually, for Dominic Raab, I would say he's a man who has been relieved of the burden of ambition. Because when he stepped up as Prime Minister, when the Prime Minister was in hospital, when he stepped up into take over those responsibilities, he looked into the abyss and he did not look very happy about it. And I think, actually, he doesn't really want that job.
He doesn't want that
He's seen
job.
how bad it is.
Where do you stand on Liz Truss?
She's very, very keen, but she hasn't got the big enough gang in the party, I don't think, to be one of the front runners. I think she's done the fizz with Liz nights, and that's helped, but she hasn't got a big enough gang.
A fizz
with Liz, yeah.
What's involved in a fizz with
Liz?
Right.
A little glass of Prosecco and a bit of chatting, a little bit of schmoozing. So
The thing about Liz Truss is that she is a true Conservative, and I applaud her for that. The problem with Liz Truss, there's no easy way to say this. There's no evidence that, if brains were gunpowder and there was an explosion in her head, they'd blow her hair off, I mean, this is her problem, I think.
I think that's very harsh.
But it was amusing.
True.
Right. OK.
You've got to laugh, otherwise I could cry. When I think the party I served as a minister for 12 years, as a member of Parliament for 18 years, couldn't have imagined they'd be in this state. So I'll go and weep or defenestrate myself from the nearest high window. I mean, it really is, for those of us who love politics, this is awful.
There is a name that is being bandied about. Just one last name I'd like the both to discuss. People speak very well of the Defence Minister, Ben Wallace.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think he's certainly won over an army of new fans because of his dealings with Ukraine, how he's responded to that. He's definitely now a contender. He's actually well-liked across the House. People think he's serious, that he's responded very well. I would say that he would have to really widen his political perspective. At the moment, he's very much... but he's very much military-focused, isn't he? He's a military background, he's in a military position. What's his kind of wider domestic agenda? What's his position on the NHS and welfare and that kind of
my question has to be, why shouldn't bald men get a look in? Why should bald men be ruled out from leadership?
Says you with a mop on his head. Says you. Is that all your own?
Yes.
It is.
Have a tug.
Oh, yes, it doesn't come off.
No,
Very nice.
It doesn't come off.
And
now you've ruffled my hair.
It's got conditioner in it and everything. It's all very, very
properly done.
Well. Ben Wallace?
Well, I actually think he's a good man. I agree with you that it's lucky that, in a way, that that he is being judged on something he's good at.
Yeah.
But I have no... look, at the end of the day, Ben Wallace is a decent and committed person. And I think a bit of decency is needed in number 10.
Folks, what do you think is needed in number 10, or who do you think is needed number 10? The present incumbent, or would you like to see someone new? You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. You've been doing that. We'll reflect those. We'll be going to some of your homes as well throughout the programme this morning. This is GB News, the People's Channel. Back after this.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A breezy day to come with some rain in the north, brighter skies further south with some sunshine for the far south of the UK, and feeling much warmer compared to recent days. High pressure is extending its influence across the southern half of the UK, but an area of low pressure is moving close to the north of Scotland, bringing some weather fronts with it, and that's why it is breezy, cloudy, and in some places wet across northern parts of the country. So for really northern Scotland, western Scotland, outbreaks of rain continuing through the morning into the early afternoon. The rain more on and off eastern Scotland, northern England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, petering out by the afternoon. But there is a gusty wind, and that's going to make it feel cool in the north. A complete contrast further south, 21 to 27 degrees with plenty of sunny spells. A sunnier day, in fact, compared to yesterday. And the cloud and the breeze in the north, well, that does push a little further south overnight, but the rain also peters out. The cloud develops some holes in it. However, we do have a relatively humid airflow now, and that means that it's going to be a mild or warm night in places, 16 or 17 degrees in the south, 12 to 14 degrees further north. A keen breeze runs down the North Sea on Thursday. That'll make it feel a bit cooler, and I think actually for many it's a cloudy start to the day. But as the day continues, the cloud will tend to lift and break up. Some decent sunny spells will break out, particularly for central and western areas. And for Scotland, certainly a brighter day with much less rain, but still some dampness in the far northwest. 16 Celsius in the Western Isles, 19 for Glasgow, 22 to 24 for southern parts of the UK. Friday is looking brighter and drier for many, plenty of sunshine around. Saturday is looking fine as well, and temperatures will rise.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
The Prime Minister's future hangs in the balance this morning as two of his most senior ministers resign. A very good morning. Good to see you. It has just gone after 8 o'clock. This is Wednesday, the 6th of July. Breakfast on GB News with Eamonn, Holmes and Isabel Webster, who's at Downing Street, leading the news this morning.
I'm live in Downing Street all morning as we assess the impact on what was quite frankly a seismic night for the Prime Minister as he lost his Chancellor and his Health Secretary. Sajid Javid saying the government was no longer acting in the national interest. We'll be asking how much longer the Prime Minister can hold on to the keys to the famous door behind me.
Well, the Prime Minister has moved quickly to replace those two men, promoting the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, to Chancellor, and the former Chief of Staff, Steve Barclay, to Health Secretary. All of this coming ahead of elections to the 1922 Committee, the body which will decide if another vote of no confidence can be held within the next few weeks. And you can join in the discussions, and we're going to be reflecting those very shortly. Just a reminder, it's gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet at gbnews. To Downing Street, let's go to Isabel and see if there's any comings or goings, or indeed any sightings of the Prime Minister, Isabel.
Good morning, Eamonn. No sightings of the Prime Minister just yet, but I can reveal in the last few moments we have just seen Andrew Griffiths walking up this famous street and going inside the doors of number 10. Let's talk to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, about exactly what that could mean, Tom, because quite frankly, there are a few vacancies to fill this morning.
There certainly are, not least this new powerful position that was established that Steve Barclay, the new Health Secretary, was previously holding, that of Chief of Staff. Now, Andrew Griffith is currently the head of the number 10 policy unit. Could that mean that he is in line for a promotion, heading up the entire operation of this Downing Street for however long this Downing Street lasts? Of course, all of these positions, many MPs will be weighing up the pros and cons. Are they taking on a poison chalice, or could this topsy-turvy premiership go on for longer than almost everyone expects? It's clearly a decision for people to weigh, but no doubt that's not the last MP that we'll see walking up that street this morning.
Yeah, very often in these kinds of situations things start to move from 8 o'clock, so we will update Eamonn and everybody who's watching and listening on any further comings and goings. In terms, though, of the broader picture, today 2 set pieces for the Prime Minister. We've got PMQs at midday, the Liaison Committee this afternoon. The last time the Prime Minister was in a really perilous situation in the wake of the Sue Gray report, he went to the dispatch box, perhaps somewhat sheepishly, and Sir Keir Starmer really didn't capitalise on that. There's real pressure on the opposition to make the most of this opportunity from their point of view, presumably.
Certainly, they have been handed a gift horse this morning, and it would be extraordinary if Sir Keir Starmer didn't make hay with this now. However, as you rightly say, the last time there was a big issue for number 10, Sir Keir Starmer was seen to sort of fluff his lines, go on a peculiar tangent at Prime Minister's questions, not stick the knife in. Now, there was some speculation that Sir Keir Starmer might have deliberately done that to try and keep this Prime Minister in place, although I think that that's reading too many of these runes, trying to play four-dimensional chess here. No, it seems that really the pressure is on the Labour Party to prove itself as a worthy opposition. The Tories clearly infighting enormously today. Will the Labour Party be able to make hay with that? Will they be able to present not only a unified front and an attack against the Conservative Party, but also present itself as an alternative government? That's a big challenge to rise to, and frankly, in some of these situations, we haven't seen Sir Keir Starmer rise to that challenge in the way that might be expected.
And we have seen the Prime Minister rise to the challenge when he's been in a position of crisis time and time again. Let's talk about the Liaison Committee this afternoon. What do they usually talk about? What's their remit? And, you know, what pressure is there on the Prime Minister to make sure that everything he says is truthful? Because it's all on record, unlike these Downing Street briefings that proved to be a bit hazy and confused over the last few days, and which ultimately led to these resignations last night when ministers felt that they'd been lied to by the Prime Minister. This is on camera, coming from the Prime Minister's mouth, being questioned.
It certainly is, and it's more forensic than Prime Minister's questions. Prime Minister's questions, of course, at midday. We'll see a rowdy chamber, no doubt some people behind the PM cheering him on. He does like to be cheered on. He does better. He's done better in Prime Minister's questions in this post-COVID era with a full chamber, with support behind him. Perhaps that support will be less fulsome today, and perhaps that will mean the Prime Minister doesn't do as well as he might ordinarily do. But then at 3 p.m, so not that much later, the Prime Minister will sit in front of the Liaison Committee. Now, that's chairs of the committees, so these are the sort of top dogs when it comes to committee politics in the Commons, and they will be forensically asking him about their own policy areas, although I have to say, probably more than their own policy areas, probably a lot to do with the conduct of number 10 and indeed the truthfulness of number 10. And unlike Prime Minister's questions, where an MP gets to ask one question, sits down and the Prime Minister answers, there's a back and forth. There's a discussion, and that could be the really significant point about 3 p.m. today.
Yeah, it's like another box office day, quite frankly, in Westminster. Hard to tear yourself away from all of this under any normal circumstances or any previous Prime Minister that anyone can really think of. The kind of pressure being heaped on from losing a Chancellor and a Health Secretary in quick succession would normally bring down a premiership. But we know from past experience that Boris Johnson doesn't act within the normal realms of being Prime Minister. He could well cling on to power. We've got the 1922 committee elections next week. Perhaps that could be another tense moment for the Prime Minister. But for now, we'll keep an eye on any comings and goings. Is there anybody there we need to...
Not an MP.
Yet. Not an MP. Just checking, Eamonn. I'll keep you posted on any more appointments or rumours or arrivals or departures.
Isabel, thanks very much indeed. Let us know. We'll be straight back to you. In the studio with me throughout the morning, the former Home Office Minister, Norman Baker. We're also joined by the former advisor to Boris Johnson, now Conservative life peer, that's Lord Moylan. And as well as that, the deputy editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers. Fraser, let's begin with you. New face to the programme this morning. Is this the end for Boris? Has he run out of road?
If it's not the end, then it really should be. I think losing two of your most senior cabinet ministers is a serious blow to your authority. And let's not forget, it's come only a few weeks after 4 in 10 of his own MPs declared they had no confidence in him. And I think the public is getting tired of this circus too. You know, this is a government that is just too consumed by scandal. Often these are quite minor scandals, but the number 10 operation, whether it's Boris Johnson's dishonesty or whether it's just rank incompetence, has an uncanny knack of turning quite minor scandals into major government crises. You know, this is a scandal about a junior minister who most people in the country had never heard of before, and yet it's threatening to bring down the government.
I think a man who'll disagree with you, staunch loyalist to Boris Johnson, Lord Moylan, there beside you. And you're going to be in the Commons today. You're going to be in the gallery today for Prime Minister questions.
I think I shall turn up, yes.
Yeah. And turn up to what? To cheer? To offer?
No, you don't make a noise in the gallery. You get thrown out if you make a noise. No, I'll be there watching and observing and learning and rooting for Boris mentally, but I won't be shouting or cheering. No.
Here's the thing, Lord Moylan, about you. You have come on and you've given a vigorous defence of the Prime Minister. Keith has been in touch, and Keith says, morning, he said, I actually think Boris could turn out to be Jack the Ripper, and I think Lord Moylan and the other die-hard Boris supporters would make excuses for him.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can take that view, but I'm trying to be a little bit objective about this. The first thing is the Cabinet is actually stronger this morning than it was yesterday. The Chancellor has been absent for the last few weeks. He seems to have lost interest. Sajid Javid, I mean, he's come to the end of his political career. He can't really return to high office again. He's resigned a couple of times now, and then he's got this question about his status as the period when he was a non-dom behind him. I don't think he'll be coming back. We've got two very strong people coming in their place, and people who want to work with Boris. The Cabinet has broadly stayed together, and he's determined, I think, to go on because he has a mandate, because he's delivering across a whole range of things, and the country is facing problems both domestically and externally with the war in Ukraine and the threat to Western Europe, or free Europe, if you like, the threat to our freedoms that come from that. And he's responding well to those things, and he thinks he has a mandate, and he thinks he has a job to do. So I think he's going to carry on. And I think all these, if I just say, the Conservative MPs are running around, thinking, oh, we'll get rid of him. One of the lessons of the Conservative Party, and one of the reasons it's survived so long, is that there comes a time when you have to stick together, and they need to learn that. There's no future for the Conservative Party in this sort of constant division and bickering. They had a vote. They should accept the result of it, back the Prime Minister, because and move in to a general election at the right time.
Lord Moylan, Norman was saying that the previous Chancellor seems to have gone AWOL, lost interest. You've got the front page of the Express there.
Yes. I mean, I don't believe he did lose interest, and I think it's a bit of a stretch, frankly, to suggest that losing your Chancellor and losing the Health Secretary somehow improves the government and improves the cabinet. I don't think they were both respected people across the parliamentary divide, Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid. I don't believe their careers are necessarily over. We want to see what the next Prime Minister, whoever that is, wants to do with his or her cabinet at that point. But the Daily Express, which, by the way, I suppose might be called the mainstream media by some people, has been solidly behind Boris all the way through, and it makes a point on today's front page that he's now free to cut taxes, as a rather snidey comment the Prime Minister made about Rishi Sunak after he resigned. He's free to cut taxes. It seems to me the Prime Minister wants to be rather populist. Everybody wants to cut taxes. I want to pay less in the way of taxes. Who doesn't? I also want the best possible public services. Who doesn't? But there's a balance to be struck between what you raise
but the Treasury is flush with money at the moment. It's been collecting far more tax than it expected. It's flush with money.
I don't think it's flush
at a time when the country has a cost of living crisis. So there is a proper balance to be struck. A constant standoff between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor is not really working, and for anybody. And I think there is a case where you could say you can have some fiscal laxity here. And I think that's Boris's call. He is the top man in the end.
Well, I don't believe that there's a wodge of money in the Treasury. Of course, there's been some money coming in from...
much more money.
Well, there's also been a huge amount of expenditure, not least of all on helping Ukraine and on bailing out Network Rail. I can give you... And all the money spent on PPE, there's a major problem in terms of how much we've ended up borrowing as a country. And the Chancellor, the ex-Chancellor now, Rishi Sunak, has taken a view, rightly or wrongly, that he has to try and be responsible with public finances. And I think that's what the difference has been. He's been trying to do that, whereas the Prime Minister wants to spend. You heard David Miller before the break saying that he regarded him as a tax and spend socialist. It's a very strong phrase.
No, he didn't say spend. What the Prime Minister has said he wants to do, it appears from this throwaway remark, he said he wants to cut taxes. That's not the same as spend. So I think we need to just be clear, Norman. What you're making up a story that has no evidence. Rishi Sunak has lost a lot of support in the Conservative Party in the House of Commons in recent weeks because he has been defending high taxes and he's failed to move on them, and there is a lot of support for reducing taxes.
There is, I agree with that.
I think the government's problems go beyond tax and spend.
Let's just hear from Fraser. He's flushed with money.
I think the government's problems go beyond kind of tax and spend. You know, this is a government that was elected, you know, with a very large mandate, with a lot of popular support. There was an expectation that Boris was a politician to get things done and get things done differently. He delivered on Brexit, albeit imperfectly, as the situation in Northern Ireland is now showing. He deserves some credit for that. But, you know, where is the radical change to politics that people were promised? People, you know, there is still a yearning in the country for politics to be brought closer to them, for their voice to have meaning, for their votes to be significant. And I think, unfortunately, this government has been derailed so much by endless scandal that the only point of it, seemingly, is its own survival.
Yeah, the real problem you've got there, and I sympathise with a lot of what you say, the real problem you've got is that the only plausible successor as Prime Minister in any party is going to be a back to the Cameronian future.
Oh, that is
and that is where you're going to end up.
That's the Tories' problem.
No, that's your problem, because you've got a vision for this country. You've just set out, which I completely understand and I have some sympathy with. So it lands up as your problem.
But looking at Rishi Sunak's resignation letter and you saying that the coffers are full, it would seem that he doesn't seem to agree. And we get on the subject of telling the truth again. He said, I firmly believe the public are ready to hear the truth. Our people know that if something is too good to be true, it's not true. Yeah. They need to know that whilst there is a path to a better future, it's not an easy one. In preparation for our proposed joint speech on the economy next week, it has become clear to me that our approaches are fundamentally too different. So he doesn't believe there's money there to spend.
Well, there are two things going on there, aren't there? And one is, a lot of people think the Treasury, the officials at the Treasury are high tax, keep the money people, and that Rishi has given in to them, he hasn't stood up to them. That's what a lot of people are saying. How true that is, I don't know. That's what a lot of people have been saying, that he needed to assert himself and he's somehow lost the will to do so. So he's entitled to his view. Of course, he was the Chancellor, he's entitled to express his view. But in the end, also, the Prime Minister is the First Lord of the Treasury. The Prime Minister is his boss, and the Prime Minister has to have some say in all of this, and he has a strong view. The second point there is, how much do you talk... Are we confronting the British people with the difficult choices that the country is going to face as we become potentially poorer as a result of recovering from the pandemic and the war in Ukraine and what that means for prices and cost of living? And that's another really good question, and we need to confront them. We need to be open with people about that, perhaps more open than we are. I agree with him about that. Mm-hmm. But the whole question of tax and spend, this is not about spending more. This is about tax cuts in people's pocket to try and help them through the cost of living crisis. It's about that and fuel. It's about things like that. Okay. That's what we're talking about.
Fraser, I want to bring you in again because what we haven't really touched upon here, this is about a couple of other things. It's about truth and it's about honesty. And I'm looking, this is Kathy from Sevenoaks, and she said, Bojo lies on the tip of his tongue. Worryingly, he's having his ministers lie for him. The whole integrity of the cabinet has been brought into question. I will never vote Conservative again after this fiasco. I am absolutely appalled.
I think There has been a worrying pattern of dishonesty from Boris, which has made these scandals bigger than they ought to have been. They probably could have been nipped in the bud. But on the other hand, I do think that this can be exaggerated. You could get the impression that Boris Johnson is the first politician to have ever lied, that he invented lying from some of the kind of responses to this scandal. And let's not forget, this goes deeper than Chris Pincher, this goes deeper than Partygate. There are certainly people who are so sick of Boris because of what he represents, because he got Brexit done, and that kind of scrambled their brains a little bit. But now it's gone beyond that as well. As you hear, loyal Boris supporters, loyal Conservative voters have had enough too. So it's kind of time for the circus to end, I think.
I think it's important not to present this as some sort of Brexit Leave versus Remain battle. I mean, that's all gone.
It's gone beyond that now,
yes. It's gone. And many of the people who are calling for the Prime Minister to go are people who voted to leave the European Union and have previously been supporters of Boris Johnson. They're looking at a wider range of issues. They may be looking at the financial situation in the country. They may be looking at the honesty and integrity, or lack of it, in number 10. It's those issues which are driving people at the moment, and I think it's dishonest and deception. It's a deception to pretend it's about something else.
So, Lord Moylan, you don't think he's run out of road? You think the fight goes on and he's not going anywhere?
Well, I'm absolutely clear in my own mind that that's what he thinks. And that's what's going to happen. And I think, these people messing about with votes for trying to rerun a vote they had only a month ago don't understand how difficult it is to remove a sitting Prime Minister who doesn't want to go. And I think all they're doing is prolonging a sense of division and argument within the Conservative Party and the government, which should be brought to an end.
But they're making a calculation, I think, in their own minds, that they have a better chance of winning the next election if he goes.
They can name, can't they, the leader they're going to unite around.
No, they can't.
More popular.
They can't.
They haven't got a clue.
No, they haven't.
They're a complete rabble in military terms.
They don't know who
they're not what we call an organised military unit. They're a rabble.
They don't know who they want. That's perfectly true. There's a whole range of people
who is this
might...
saviour who's going to save them? I'll tell you who saved them. Alex Chalk. And Alex Chalk is a really nice guy. Alex Chalk resigned yesterday. He had a majority of 2,000 in his seat in Cheltenham in 2017. And he knew he was facing losing that seat. In 2019, he retained that seat, slightly reduced majority. He retained that seat. He retained it solely because of Boris. And now he walks out on Boris, and who's going to save his seat next time?
Because he's concluded that Boris won't save him next time.
He's going to walk out. He's walked out, and nobody is going to save his seat. He hasn't got a clue. I regard that as cluelessness.
Well,
guys, we've just got another resignation I want to bring to you. Laura Trott, who's the Minister for Transport, gone, handed in her resignation on that one. So she's an Undersecretary at Transport.
My old job.
Your old job?
My old job, partly, yes, Undersecretary at Transport. But I think the danger today for the Prime Minister, one of the dangers today, is he has a reshuffle, which he's now put 2 new people in place. If other people start resigning from the Cabinet, and they may do, we don't know, there's rumours about the Welsh Secretary, for example, Simon Hart, he'll have to continue to do reshuffles all the way through. He won't get a settled team until it is all over.
OK, so we've got a Prime Minister who's there in name. Is he in power?
No, I don't think so. I mean, who has confidence in him anymore? How can he be expected to govern when his administration is being derailed constantly by, pretty much anything? This Chris Pincher scandal, let's not forget, this is a scandal over sexual misconduct, by a junior minister, and yet even this has the potential to sort of blow Boris off his course. Probably the deeper problem is that this administration just doesn't really have much of a purpose. It's drifting, and that's why it's allowing itself to be blown off course so easily. It's not the same as it was in 2019. Perhaps the pandemic, put an end to that. It doesn't have that same populist energy behind it, and so it is really running out of steam.
Every day he stares, this final point. Does he poison the well for the rest of the Conservatives?
I think there are a lot of people poisoning the Conservative well at the moment, and the one who is actually, in my view, offers the best hope of saving it and keeping it all together is Boris. I'll tell you what I really think about the Conservative Party without Boris. The Conservative Party it has always been a coalition of people with different views. I mean, most political parties in Britain are a coalition of people with different views. But they've got to be held together by something. And the problem is here that I think these splits that go back to 2016, and they're nothing to do with Boris as Prime Minister, they go back to Brexit. It's not only Brexit, but they go back to Brexit. I think there's a real danger of the Conservative Party ending up as two parties and splitting. And some people, maybe some of your viewers would welcome that, I don't know. But I think there's a real danger, and I think they've got to confront that and look into the abyss and see what they're actually up to. Unity is everything for the Conservative Party if it's to survive as a fighting and governing force.
Lord Moylan, thank you very much indeed. Lord Moylan is a former advisor to Boris Johnson. He's now a Conservative life peer. He will be in the gallery for Prime Minister's questions today, not accompanied by, but alongside this morning, Fraser Myers. He's the Deputy Editor of Spike. Thank you very much indeed for your opinion. Norman Baker will stay with us until the end of the programme this morning. What's going to happen next is we're going to be live from Rishi Sunak's constituency. That's Richmond, not in Surrey, Richmond in Yorkshire. That to come. We'll be there live after the weather update.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A breezy day to come with some rain in the north, brighter skies further south with some sunshine for the far south of the UK, and feeling much warmer compared to recent days. High pressure is extending its influence across the southern half of the UK, but an area of low pressure is moving close to the north of Scotland, bringing some weather fronts with it, and that's why it is breezy, cloudy, and in some places wet across northern parts of the country. So for really northern Scotland, western Scotland, outbreaks of rain continuing through the morning into the early afternoon. The rain more on and off eastern Scotland, northern England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, petering out by the afternoon. But there is a gusty wind, and that's going to make it feel cool in the north. A complete contrast further south, 21 to 27 degrees with plenty of sunny spells. A sunnier day, in fact, compared to yesterday. And the cloud and the breeze in the north, well, that does push a little further south overnight, but the rain also peters out. The cloud develops some holes in it. However, we do have a relatively humid airflow now, and that means that it's going to be a mild or warm night in places, 16 or 17 degrees in the south, 12 to 14 degrees further north. A keen breeze runs down the North Sea on Thursday. That'll make it feel a bit cooler, and I think actually for many it's a cloudy start to the day. But as the day continues, the cloud will tend to lift and break up. Some decent sunny spells will break out, particularly for central and western areas. And for Scotland, certainly a brighter day with much less rain, but still some dampness in the far northwest. 16 Celsius in the Western Isles, 19 for Glasgow, 22 to 24 for southern parts of the UK. Friday is looking brighter and drier for many, plenty of sunshine around. Saturday is looking fine as well, and temperatures will rise.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Approaching 8:30, very good to have you on board. You're listening and watching Breakfast on GB News. We're still talking about the resignations of those key cabinet members. Let's now go to Anna Riley. She's in Yorkshire. This is Rishi Sunak's constituency of Richmond there. And I know you're talking to people, Anna. You're finding out what they think. Are they shocked by all of this or not? Let's find out.
Good morning, Eamonn. Yes, I'm in the former Chancellor's constituency of Richmond in North Yorkshire, and I'm joined by David Todd. He is the owner of Frenchgate Restaurant and Hotel here in Richmond. What is your thoughts on Rishi standing down as Chancellor after what people are branding the latest sleaze row in the Conservative Party?
Good morning, Anna. And is this microphone live?
It is.
Are there actually people listening?
There are.
There's too many microphones out there that are not working, or people are just not listening, I'm afraid. My feeling this morning is one of overwhelming despair. Despair that even in this beautiful blue town of Richmond, my vote 6 years ago in the Brexit referendum to leave was a wasted vote. And the years of stagnation that followed under Theresa May, followed by the resounding victory that Boris delivered with an 80-seat majority, which I predicted exactly on the money, was also a wasted vote.
So are you feeling that these sort of latest rounds of resignations are linked to Brexit? Is that your thoughts?
100%. Having an 80-seat majority in Westminster is worthless if the majority of people in that House are still wishing to remain in Europe.
So do you think Rishi Sunak should have stood by Boris Johnson? Then do you disagree with him standing down as Chancellor?
I think in this country, which I believed was a democratic country, that this was an opportunity for all MPs, particularly the high-profile MPs, to get behind the voice, the will of the people, and to deliver on Brexit. People are asking now, what is the legacy? And they're talking about Boris in the past tense. What has he actually achieved? Rather than ask what has he achieved, what has he been allowed to achieve in Westminster?
So when it comes to the next election, then, will Rishi Sunak be getting your vote here in Richmond?
Today, I feel that I'm in a bit of a vacuum in terms of where to vote. An undemocratic Tory party. All the other parties until yesterday were clear that they would be going back into Europe, or certainly make it difficult to leave Europe. And of course, Sir Keir Starmer himself yesterday recognised that it's a good idea to follow the will of the people and agreed that we should stay out of Europe. But it's something that the MPs should be working at and to deliver the mandate that was given to them by the people. 47 million people voted in that general election to deliver that 80-seat majority. Unfortunately, the House is split across cross-party lines now, not along left or right or Liberal or centre, but along the Brexit lines. And it doesn't matter who is leading this government. If they do not have the support of their MPs to deliver the will of the people. I look north of the border, I look south of the border now. We're being governed by people who are not following the will of the people.
So overall, then, you wish you'd stayed in post and supported the Prime Minister?
It was an opportunity to demonstrate that democracy is still alive and kicking in this country. Unfortunately, myself and particularly those poor voters in the heartlands of Labour, the so-called Red Wall seats north of here, I feel particularly sorry for those. They entrusted their vote with the only party at the time that was saying that they were going to deliver on the people's wishes.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts there, David. So, Eamonn, David here saying that he feels a bit disillusioned at the moment and that he feels that it's a real blow to democracy with Rishi Sunak standing down as Chancellor.
You could hear it in his voice, Anna. Thank you to you. Thank you to David Toyd, live from Richmond in Yorkshire. But Rishi Sunak's not the only one who stood down. We go to Isabel at Downing Street. More political resignations, Isabel?
Yeah, that's right. Some breaking news to bring you, Eamonn. You might remember, if you cast your mind back 2 mornings ago, we interviewed Will Quince. He is the Children's Minister. Not a particularly well-known face. Lots of people suggesting that the Cabinet were wheeling out some of those less familiar faces because some of the big ones weren't wanting to come in front of camera. Well, Will Quince came out on camera because he'd been given assurances behind the scenes that the Prime Minister knew nothing about those allegations relating to Chris Pincher. Well, obviously, he was disappointed by the news last night, that U-turn from Downing Street, and he has tendered his resignation. These are his words on Twitter. "It is with great sadness and regret that I have this morning tendered my resignation to the Prime Minister after I accepted and repeated assurances on Monday to the media, including us on GB News, which have now been found to be inaccurate. I wish my successor well. It is the best job in government." Let's bring in Tom Harwood to talk about this, because as well as that resignation in the last few moments, we also had a more junior resignation. I think that makes it the 8th junior resignation from Laura Trott, PPS in transport. This is not a good look for the Prime Minister.
Yes, and certainly the Will Quince resignation, I think, is more significant than the number of trade envoys, than the number of PPSs, those more junior roles working for cabinet ministers that we've seen. We've seen a smattering of those names leave the payroll, as we call it, leave their front bench positions. But this is a minister who, of course, represented the government on national television just 2 days ago, and it does show the core of what is going on right now, why everything seems to be slipping away from the Prime Minister at this point in time, and that is the question of trust. And if these key ministerial positions, if these people who have been sent out to represent the government feel like they cannot trust the government, that is a big, significant issue.
Some people have been commenting that it's interesting that these people who are now tendering their resignations didn't seem to mind that the Prime Minister had misled the public, but it's when they personally had been misled that they felt that their positions were no longer tenable. Do you think that's fair?
I think it really depends on what we're trying to establish as what is misleading and what isn't. I think there are legitimate arguments that Number 10 can and have made with regard to what the Prime Minister knew and when, and indeed any of us trying to recall one conversation that happened in a busy moment in our lives 3 years ago, it's understandable how the Prime Minister may not have recalled that initially. It is obviously a line that has been widely mocked in the media and in Parliament, but it doesn't necessarily lead to that black and white stance of dishonesty. Indeed, I think there's arguments that can be made in favour of what Number 10 has said at most of these steps along the way. At most, they've been obfuscatory, I suppose, is the clearest point that we could say. But when it comes to dishonesty, that is a subjective analysis, and I suppose it's for individual ministers, individual MPs to make their own minds up on that front.
OK, Tom, thank you very much. So whether or not that was deliberately misleading his own cabinet or deliberately misleading Parliament over Partygate or indeed over Chris Pincher is a matter for debate, perhaps. But certainly if it's down to lack of judgment or perhaps forgetfulness, that comes down to competency, doesn't it? And I just remind you of the words that Rishi Sunak wrote in his resignation letter last night. He said the public rightly expect the government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously. He doesn't think it is anymore. We'll keep you posted on any more comings and goings here in Downing Street. Eamonn.
Thanks, Isabel. So 2 ministerial resignations this morning then.
Yes, Laura Trott, I think, was the other one, the Transport Minister, which was my old role at the Department of Transport. And I think this is not going to end here. There could be more resignations as we go through the day. There may even be more cabinet resignations, which makes any concept of a reshuffle very difficult, because you complete one reshuffle and you find that the pieces on the board have moved again. But I think, you know, to lose one minister is unfortunate. To lose a whole bunch looks like carelessness, to paraphrase Oscar Wilde. And Will Quince, I think, was particularly angry because he'd been wheeled out to defend the Prime Minister. give a line which then turned out not to be true. He felt, no doubt, he'd been set up. He was cannon fodder for the message from Number 10. And, of course, he didn't like that. And why would he?
No, why would he indeed? And, you know, what is it that makes Boris Johnson tick? What makes him carry on? We've got his biographer, Tom Bowers. I'm going to be speaking to Tom just after 9 o'clock this morning as to Boris Johnson, what makes this man tick. Because although you're saying how uncomfortable it would be with ministerial resignations, even cabinet resignations over this, he seems to be quite immune to it, personally.
I remember Andrew Rawnsley, who was the political correspondent in The Observer, a long time ago, saying Boris Johnson wants to be Prime Minister and he wants to have been Prime Minister. He doesn't actually want to be Prime Minister. He wanted the grandeur associated with it, without necessarily getting involved in the nitty-gritty that being a good Prime Minister entails.
But you can see the showbiz side to him. You can see the performer side in them. I mean, he will have a guaranteed future on the after-dinner circuit and whatever. The fact he, you know, was a journalist, the fact he was a television presenter before all of this came his way, that made the public know who he was. That gave him a personality. But a lot of people are saying that personality's not enough.
No, I mean, look, Boris is a very entertaining character. He'll be a fantastic after-dinner speaker after he's Prime Minister, as he was before he was Prime Minister. He's very entertaining. He'll be very good on television. And no doubt many of the public relate to that and see him as a human being, which he is. Doesn't make him a good Prime Minister. I mean, you look at someone in the distant past, let's say Clement Attlee after the Second World War, who looked terribly uninteresting, and Churchill said of him, an empty taxi drew up and Attlee got out, and that was his personality at the time. And yet he was a very successful Prime Minister. So, you know, the star celebrity bit and the competent Prime Minister bit don't necessarily go together, and they don't go together in this one. OK, well, look, I look forward to you being with me as we talk to Tom Bowers after 9, the Boris Johnson biographer. Going through the papers, David Mellor, and we've got Sam Lister, who's the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Express, with all they have to say after this short break. Hope you can join me.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Look, into the papers again. Obviously, there's only one story. Will Boris Johnson survive as Prime Minister? Resignations are still happening while we're on air. Will Quince, the Under-Secretary of State for Children has gone. Laura Trott, Transport Minister, has gone. Sam Lister's the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Express. What do you make of those?
Well, very fast-paced, obviously. We were likely to get more resignations this morning, I think. And if the rebels have got any sense, they'd time one at 5 to 12 just before Boris Johnson goes into Prime Minister's question time. So we'll see how well organised they are. But Will Quince, we expected Will Quince to quit yesterday, actually. He was professionally embarrassed, essentially, on Monday morning. He was sent out to talk to people like you and explain Downing Street's position on the Chris Pincher scandal. He was given duff information. He was professionally embarrassed. It's not a surprise he's gone. Laura Trott, on the other hand, she's a rising star in the party. She's an aide. That is slightly more surprising. So, but you can see that where this is going this morning.
Isabel, Downing Street made a very good point there about a lot of them will mislead the public. They're happy to do their duty on that. What they don't like is them to be misled themselves, though.
Yeah. Indeed, it's difficult because ministers have to defend the government's position, even if they don't personally agree with it. That is part of collective responsibility. What they don't want to go out and do is tell lies, and he was given the wrong information, and so you can understand why he's done that. And actually, I think a lot of other ministers in government looked at what happened on Monday morning with him and thought, actually, this could be me tomorrow, and that's caused part of the problem.
Just a point on this collective responsibility. You see, in the bad old days, Margaret Thatcher ran a very tight ship and, of course, had very strong media enforcers to keep us all in line. Ministers were not allowed to go out and talk about other people's responsibilities. Now it seems that people have put on some television schedule and they can talk about anything, even if they know nothing about it. That's an invitation to the kind of incoherence that the government has on its message.
Looking at it from the other side, as an interviewer, I think ministers are far too easily accessible nowadays to minor interviewers.
Exactly.
And I think if it's not your brief, what are you talking about it for? Exactly. I mean, if I was the health secretary, what do I know about defence? What do I really want to have an opinion and be quoted on that for? I think the brief's far too wide with them. But then that's the way media has gone, availability, accessibility, social media, with those sort of things.
Bernard Ingham, a formidable man, still with us.
A formidable man and a big beast, and the people that you would have known, the Tebbets, the Heseltines, you didn't mess with them.
No, and he used to run Margaret Thatcher. He said, you're not going to read the newspapers, it'll depress you. I will give you a digest. Seriously, I give you a digest every morning of what you need to know. You shouldn't be spending your time thinking about what they've written about you or whatever. And, he was a formidable man. But, even someone I think of myself as a relatively firm and strong person. But if I knew Bernard was after me, I was always thinking, Christ. Yeah.
I would say the difference is these days is that we now have 24-hour news, and the demands on the government are endless. And so, they have to put people out. They've got to fill that void. You don't want to allow the other side to fill that gap on the schedule. So it's a very different situation to the Thatcher government.
But I still think it would be better if they said less.
I think less is more. I definitely do. But Sam, you mentioned Laura Trott, a loyalist. Surprising that she stepped down or stepped away. Will Quince, as we say as well, put out for the rounds on Monday, has now resigned as well. Do you think these two have protected them, future-proofed themselves? Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's it. And, MPs are always making these calculations, aren't they? Where are we today? What are my chances of success in this role compared to my future chances of success? And so they're always constantly weighing up these issues. And so they've obviously made that calculation and decided it's better for them to go right now. They've got a better chance of going back in at a more senior position further down the line.
OK. David, I need to talk about some newspapers, my friend. The Telegraph, page 7. As for the contenders, we're talking about ministers future-proofing themselves. Those who wielded the knife both hope to wear the crown. Do you think so in the terms of Javid and Sunak?
I'm not sure that I do. I think Javid and Sunak did the right thing by the country, and those who didn't should not benefit from it. Those who failed... Look, there's a level of unacceptability that some close colleague, like Boris, has got, that it's impossible, I would have thought, for any right-thinking cabinet minister to put up with this. And the Pincher episode was just one example of it. And so nobody should benefit from the fact that they did not take steps. And as for Javid and Sunak, they did the right thing, and it would have been better if they'd done it sooner, to be honest.
OK. Liz, where are we going to go with you? Sorry, Sam, what do we call you Liz for? Sam, where are we going to, what do you want to talk about next?
Well, we could talk about the front of the Daily Express, if you like. My paper. We've got the story today about, Boris Johnson obviously launching his fight back. Obviously, we've seen that it's already being overshadowed by these ministerial resignations. But he pitched to his MPs last night, look, this is a chance to reset. Rishi Sunak, he's been holding me back. I want to cut taxes. Let's have it. This is a moment of liberation. So that's how he's trying to pitch this. Actually, this is not a catastrophe. It's not a crisis. It's a moment
an opportunity.
to yeah, exactly. Now, let's see how today pans out. He's got a very, very difficult day.
If he believed in that, he could have biffed Sunak at any point, could he not?
Exactly. And, getting rid of chancellors is always a risky move. So,
What if the Chancellor gets rid of you?
Well...
As happened to Margaret Thatcher, didn't it?
Yes, but the interesting thing is when a Prime Minister falls out with the Chancellor, it usually spells the end. That's what happened to Margaret Thatcher when she fell out with Nigel Lawson. And that was why, I suspect, Blair, for all that he and Brown loathed each other, he tried to keep him close.
It didn't really work, though, did it? Because actually Brown was constantly undermining Blair from number 11 throughout pretty much the whole of his time in government. And that was really very destructive. And even though they remained in government, that power relationship was very, very toxic.
But the interesting thing is that these things we're talking about were where Prime Ministers and Chancellors fell out over policy. I think this must be the first time in a very long time, I can think of a precedent, where senior ministers are falling out amongst themselves because of the personal standards of behaviour of the Prime Minister.
On the point of personal standards, we go to the Times and we talk about the Pincher scandal there. Are we dealing with, is this a sex scandal that has ultimately led to all of this problems, or is this a side issue?
Well, it's interesting. See, Matthew Parris, who is someone I've known for 40 years, and, he is gay and therefore looks at things from a gay perspective. But he deals with a Tory whip, Sarah Dines, who was the first person, I think, to have noticed what was going on with pinching in the Carlton Club. And apparently, he says, one of the men complained to her, so she asked him whether he was gay. Yes, he said. But why was she asking? She replied, that doesn't make it straightforward. So in other words, you're sexually assaulted by the Deputy Chief Whip, but if you yourself are gay, it doesn't make it easy to deal with the complaint. I don't know what... I think we need an explanation from her. And of course, what... Paris is always very clever about how he puts things. Suppose it were a young woman, he said, that Pincher was alleged to have groped. And when she complained to Dines had said, are you heterosexual? And on hearing that she was, Dines had explained, that doesn't make it straightforward. I mean... But you see, one of the problems for a lot of these people is they suddenly find themselves put in situations they shouldn't be asked to be in, and quite a lot of people will make a mess under those circumstances. I mean, the issue is not really what a junior Tory whip did watching what Pincher was up to in the Carlton Club. The issue comes back all the time. Why on earth was Pincher in government? And above all, why on earth was Pincher in a sensitive position in government where we're supposed to deal with complaints of sexual misbehaviour?
So how much of this is a sexual scandal? How much is this about the Prime Minister's moral compass, or just other matters?
I think what happened here is it started as a sex scandal, and actually it moved on to being a matter of trust. Downing Street were putting out information that was clearly incorrect, and that went on for 4 days. And even yesterday when we spoke to the Prime Minister's spokesman, the first question he was asked was, are you going to tell us the truth today? And that is a pretty bad state of affairs.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad when it's got to that point. That's not something that has ever really happened in my time in politics, in journalism, in the lobby. But it is a matter of trust. But I would say Boris Johnson's allies insist that all the time his opponents are using these scandals, other people doing misdeeds, to beat Boris Johnson, and that's they feel quite frustrated about that.
But the problem for Boris is this: Pincher should have been pushed to one side, never appointed back into government. And what Simon MacDonald, the former permanent secretary at the Foreign Office, said, about how it was found that he had done the thing, or they say he'd been found to have done the groping and being a nuisance that he was when he was a Foreign Office Minister. That should have been the end of him. But you see, I think the problem for Boris is that he actually doesn't think that the rules apply to him, and therefore, even if the man that he is appointing to a sensitive job is a groper and nuisance, because he, Boris, wants him in, the fact he's a groper and nuisance doesn't matter. But of course it does.
Well, I'm going to be talking to Tom Byers just after 9 o'clock this morning. He's a biographer of Boris Johnson as to what makes the man tick. So we're going to be talking about that. Guys, from you two, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate your contribution throughout the programme this morning. David Miller and Sam Lister, with the time at 8 minutes now before 9 o'clock. Going to bring you up to date with what's happening news-wise. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the government is collapsing and Boris Johnson is unfit to govern. He's also said he would support a general election if one were called. Tougher gun control laws are being introduced in England to prevent people deemed medically unfit from owning a firearm. A digital flagging system will enable doctors to alert police if patients with firearm certificates develop conditions such as mental health or drug or alcohol abuse problems. Consumer confidence in the economy has hit its lowest point since the start of the pandemic, according to which just 8% think it will improve over the next 12 months, while 78% think it will worsen as the cost of living crisis continues. Another breakfast on GB News viewer to speak to. We go to Sue Ashcombe-Hurt, who is a member of the Conservative Party. Sue's from Sandbach, and we know Sue because she's appeared on the programme a number of times. Last time I saw you, Sue, of course, was in Manchester. Good to see you again.
Hi, Eamonn. Nice to see you again too.
Good. Well, what do you think about, we're here today talking. It's always nice to touch base again and your politics. And where do you stand on what's been happening overnight?
Well, first of all, I've never voted for Boris. I never thought he'd make a good Prime Minister because he is not interested in detail. He's only interested in the glamorous bits of politics. But I do get annoyed with MPs who actually put him forward. We were only given two choices at the election for a leader, and that was him and Hunt. And in my view, neither of them were fit for purpose. But I think Boris has got two big problems. One, he's got the media and the Remainers against him all the time. No matter what he does, however small it is, they blow it up into something humongous. And the second thing he does is he promotes his mates. He doesn't look for the best person for the job. And that's the first thing I think every Prime Minister should do. I'm going to bring in Lord Moylan, who's sitting beside me here together with Norman Baker, with their opinions on what you're saying and to talk to you about that. Lord Moylan, you hear what Sue's having to say there. She's saying that Boris has got a problem with the media. There's perhaps a witch hunt to get him out of office, and he promotes his mates. Were you one of his mates?
First of all, my policy is the voters are always right, so I'm not here to argue with Sue. And the Conservative never argue with members of the Conservative Party and activists, because they're definitely always right. I think Sue makes a very good point, and I think a lot of people have spotted that, even people who are not Boris supporters like Sue, that the relentlessness of the media coverage and the focus on Boris and the way it's become a sort of a game for the media is something that I think has struck home with a lot of people. And I think that is balancing off with a lot of support, with a lot of voters, concerns about, it's diminishing the concerns, it's diluting the concerns that others have expressed about the way in which Number 10 approaches scandals and difficulties and the stories it gets out and so on. So I think there's a lot to learn from listening to. But
is she right when Sue says Sue?
No, I'm sorry. Can I come back to this thing about promoting?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But any Prime Minister who puts a cabinet together has to think about how to balance it across the party. And Boris set out doing that. And I think there's a lot of balance that he's tried to represent different groups and different elements of the party, perhaps almost too much, to the point that I think in some ways Boris's sense of direction has been diluted by having people from different wings of the party. This idea that he just promotes mates is not borne out by the evidence. There are plenty of Remainers who've served in the cabinet and as ministers, and he's balanced off lots of people, almost to the point of diluting his own purpose.
Sue, what next? What next for Boris Johnson? Is he toast, do you think?
I think that the rebels, I mean, in the Daily Mail this morning, it's saying if he doesn't go himself, this is war. And that really disgusts me as a Conservative supporter, that this is what happens to Conservatives after they've been in office a while. They just start thinking of themselves and not the country and their own ambitions. And if anybody, they're all jealous of whoever's in the Prime Minister's spot. As I say, I've never approved of him, but it's wrong for MPs to decide to get rid of him when he's been voted in by a huge majority of 80 seats that they think they know better and they want to get rid of him. And he really needs to listen to older people like Lord Frost and John Redwood. Economics is the thing.
So you bring up a point that so many people have been getting in touch have said, and Norman, it's not that. I mean, that's not what the parliamentary system is about. But a lot of people believe, like Sue, they voted the Prime Minister in, so therefore they think it should be up to them to take him away and not his parliamentary colleagues.
Well, I think some people voted for the Prime Minister, some people voted for the Conservative Party, some people voted for their own local MP. It's not as simple as saying that every single vote cast for the Conservatives was a vote for Boris Johnson. But we are a parliamentary democracy. The Prime Minister is only there as long as his own party supports, and that's the same with any party and any Prime Minister at any particular time. And if he loses the support of his own party in Parliament, then a democratic system, what you have in this country, means he will be removed, and that's just how it is.
And that's the system. And I just say that on behalf of everybody who's been in touch today, to echo exactly what Sue is saying, just very briefly.
What Norman is saying would be totally convincing, and is broadly right, but totally convincing if they weren't trying to get elected with the basis of changing the rules so they can have a vote that he won only a month ago.
With that, we have to leave it. Thank you very much indeed, Sue. Lovely seeing you again. Who knows when we're going to talk again next. Keep in touch. Thank you very much indeed.
I will. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much indeed. Look, after the break, we're going to be talking to Boris Johnson's biographer about the man he calls the gambler after this.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Prime Minister's future hangs in the balance as two more Conservative MPs resign. A very good morning to you. 2 minutes past 9 on this Wednesday, the 6th of July. You're tuned into Breakfast on GB News with me, Eamonn, Holmes and Isabel Webster at Downing Street, leading the news this morning.
I'm live in Downing Street for us this morning, where the government's reeling from 12 resignations and counting. 2 of those from Cabinet heavyweights, the Chancellor and the Health Secretary. We'll have full analysis on what this means for the Prime Minister and how much longer he can hold on to the keys to that famous door behind me.
Well, the Prime Minister has moved quickly to replace the 2 senior Cabinet Ministers, Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid. He's promoted the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, who that is not him, that is the Chief of Staff, Steve Barclay. He's also been promoted to Health Secretary. All of this coming ahead of elections to the 1922 Committee Executive, the body which will decide if another vote of no confidence can be held within the next few weeks.
I'm in Boris Johnson's constituency of Uxbridge and Ruislip to find out what residents think.
Thanks very much indeed for getting in touch this morning. With high inflation now is not the time for tax cuts, says Keith. Mike adds, good day. Boris needs to disband Parliament, sack all the MPs. It'll save us a lot of money, then rule like Cromwell. There we go. Keep them coming in. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet at gbnews. OK, so new resignations this morning. Will Quince, he's the Children's Minister, was the Children's Minister. We interviewed him on this very programme on Monday morning. And Laura Trott, Laura is private or was private secretary at the Department of Transport. She quit as well. So the Chancellor and the Health Secretary stood down last night just after 6 o'clock, moments after the PM apologised for appointing the guy accused of sexual molestation, Chris Pincher, to a government role. Let's get the latest from Isabel, who I hear is ready for us at Downing Street. Let's find out. Isabel.
I am indeed, Eamonn. As you say, Will Quince and Laura Trott make the total number of resignations 12 in the last, I think I make it about 15 hours now. The fast pace of this will really be undermining the authority of the Prime Minister, who is frankly clinging on to power this morning. We can get full analysis on what the scale of all of this means from our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, the heavyweights, of course, last night, Rishi Sunak and indeed Sajid Javid, the Chancellor and the Health Secretary, the first real blows in this domino effect, but it's continuing this morning. All of those posts need to be filled. The Prime Minister has to appear before PMQs at midday. This is not a government that is in a good position.
No, it's going to be a very, very tricky day for the Prime Minister. Of course, Prime Minister's questions at midday, followed by the liaison committee at 3 o'clock, where all the chairs of committees will forensically question the Prime Minister, not just with one question that then they have to sit down and listen to his answer, but they can come back to him and back and forth, and it's a long marathon session that he'll be subjected to there. That's going to be very tricky. But yes, you're right, junior ministerial resignations now. It looks like the tide has been stemmed in terms of cabinet resignations. There was a worry of a bigger domino effect for number 10 last night, but they almost cauterised the wounds there with very swift reappointments. However, those appointments that have been made, the new Chancellor, Nadeem Zahawi, and indeed the new Health Secretary, Secretary Steve Barclay, well, they themselves have left gaps. Nadine was, of course, Education Secretary. Now Michelle Donnellan, who was a junior Education Minister, Universities Minister, is the new Education Secretary. But that, of course, leaves a gap in terms of who's the Universities Minister. As with all of these appointments, there are gaps to fill. And it's going to be a tricky job finding people to take a lot of these places, because to some extent they'll be viewed as poisoned chalices. How long will this premiership go on? We know that there are 1922 committee executive elections that take place on Wednesday next week. The campaigns are already going and people standing for those positions, some of whom we've interviewed on this channel, including Andrew Bridgen, standing on a specific manifesto of changing the rules, of allowing another vote of no confidence in this Prime Minister in short order. It could all come very, very quickly, although for now, Number 10 is hoping they've done enough to at least delay what many people see as now inevitable.
OK, Tom, thank you very much indeed for that. Of course, not only have they got the difficult task of filling many of those posts, and who knows how many more posts they might have to fill before the day is done, but they also have the issue of policy to try and carry out. And we're hearing rumours that behind the scenes, Rishi Sunak was incredibly frustrated that his big national insurance cut that was due to come into action from today was being overshadowed by yet more scandal. We'll get more details, I'm sure, about why people have been so disaffected with Boris Johnson's premiership throughout the course of the day. But for now, back to you, Eamonn.
Thanks, Isabel. Now, here's an interesting interview. We're going to bring in political biographer, royal biographer, the author of Boris Johnson, The Gambler. That is Tom Bauer. And Tom, I should say to you, alongside me here in the studio, a fellow author, Mr. Norman Baker, who'll be chatting to you as well there. Tom, why did you call your book The Gambler?
Because, good morning, because throughout his life, Boris has taken risks and on the whole got away with it. And when he hasn't got away with it, he's doubled down and recovered. And that has been his great strength, that his bid for survival, his talent at escapology has seen him through to become Prime Minister of Britain. His problem is, and for his supporters, his tragedy is that it wasn't good enough, that in the end, character is fate. He's a man who has got away with it so often by not telling the truth or by taking risk. And this time, in the glare of publicity, he's done it too many times. He hasn't got away with it. And therefore, it has been a complete disaster for him. And the gambler, in the end, gets caught out.
What does that make him like to work with, to be a colleague of his, to try and share policy or take orders or direction from him?
Well, I think your previous guest, Daniel Moylan, would testify that those who worked with Boris enjoyed it enormously. He was not only great fun, but he was a good chairman. He listened, he took advice when he was Mayor of London. He delegated, made a decision and moved on. And that is what his supporters thought he would be like as Prime Minister. Unfortunately, he wasn't. He too often didn't have a clear view and didn't stick to his original opinions. And more to the point, he couldn't formulate a destination in a way which his followers and supporters could see leading to success. And whether it was COVID or whether it's his personal arrangements, which I think is very much to blame, the collapse of his marriage and his marriage to Carrie Johnson now, I think he has become destabilized. And his great instincts as a gambler, as a survivor, as a strategist, as a populist politician, as a man who amused and at the same time could lead, I fear have deserted him. And he is now beleaguered and he can throw in the dice whichever way he wants. I don't think he has much time left.
Tom, sounds like you've written his obituary for him.
Well, I mean, you know, for his enemies, it's a delight. And of course, he's had lots of enemies. For those who thought in 2019, this is a man who saved Britain from Corbyn, who has done Brexit, I mean, fulfilled the referendum result, who steered the nation okay through COVID, the government would be able to channel a terrific program of renewal and all the rest. That was the hope by his supporters. Unfortunately, he's failed to deliver. And he's really come undone by his lack of veracity. I mean, that in the end is critical. And it sadly has let him down.
Can I give you a political saying, which is that gratitude is the expectation of things to come?
Well, you know, there's no, for his enemies, this is a day of pleasure. For those who had hoped that he would learn his lessons, that he was intelligent enough to be able to see what he had to do to correct his failings, this is in the end a great disappointment. But in the end, he's lost the trust of too many Conservatives, and that is where it matters, especially in the shires across the country. And if you lose the trust of your supporters, you just can't remain. And sadly for him, that is what has happened.
So, Tom, you've written about him. You know him, his personality very well. Would you say that he's going to fall on his sword, or will he have to be crowbarred out of Downing Street?
Oh, absolutely. He'll have to be crowbarred out. I anticipate that in the end, Graham Brady, the chairman of the 22 committee, who is no great admirer of Boris, will take great pleasure in going in to tell him, that just as he told Theresa May some years ago, that Boris, you're going to have to go, you've lost the support of the party in Parliament. I think Graham Brady is looking forward to that conversation. The question is whether Boris approves and goes willingly. My guess is, of course, he won't. But in the end, he will be forced to, because they'll change the rules of the 22 committee and he'll be out by the end of next week. It's a matter of days now, in my view.
Tom, what is it that makes him the man he is, the man that won't say goodbye to power?
Well, he's wanted power all his life. He is a great fighter. I mean, no one should underestimate the learning lessons playing the Eton Wall game. He is a man who's bullied his way through with tremendous sense of purpose and self-belief. Although, of course, sometimes, like everybody, he has moments of doubt. In the end, he crushes those doubts. But no one should underestimate his very tough childhood. Everyone thinks he's a toff, but in fact, he had a rather impoverished and a rather sad childhood and had to fight for survival. And that is exactly what you're seeing today, all these years later. He's a battler for survival. He is a survivor, and he has survived many, many reverses. It's just that this one is, like others before, there is no way out for him now. He's just made too often the same mistake. And the critical weakness he has when his obituary does come to be written is that he's a loner. He's a man without friends, and more importantly, without people around him who tell him when he's doing things wrong. And that I put down to his divorce from Marina Wheeler, his longtime wife, and living with Carrie, who is not someone who herself understands sensibly enough how to tell him when he's doing wrong, encourages his weaknesses, encourages his stubbornness, and in the end is as much responsible for his failings over the last months of being unable to tell the truth as himself. And it's a bad combination. It's a bad chemistry between the two. She's advised him to do too many bad errors, like the wallpaper and everything else. These things count in the end, and that in the end is a couple of unfortunate people who now will have to leave Downing Street.
Fascinating insight, Tom Bauer. Thank you, the author of Boris the Gambler. Appreciate your time, Tom. We've got to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's now look at the economic consequences and the fallout of what's been happening over the past 12 hours or so. And our business editor, Liam Halligan, joins us in the studio. So one chancellor gone, a new chancellor in place. What are the markets making of all of this?
Well, it just so happened, Eamonn, that yesterday was a pretty spicy day on global financial markets anyway, even before these resignations. The American stock markets went down, Asian stock markets went down. The FTSE 100, which is the index of leading shares here in the UK, that ended the day 3% down, with the UK faring worse than many other countries, probably because of this political turmoil. And significantly, I think, the pound went below $1.19. What does that mean? Well, just a month ago, the pound was worth $1.25, so it's a big decrease. And once the pound starts to get below $1.20, $1.19, those imports that we rely on in the UK, particularly imports of fuel, which is priced in dollars, they become more expensive. So a falling exchange rate adds to inflation here, not least because we have to import fuel, and that fuel becomes more expensive. I think there is a sense that unless the government gets a grip on this quite quickly, as I said on GB News last night, then sterling could come in the crosshairs of financial markets and they could test the resolve of the government and the Bank of England to keep sterling roughly where it is.
So then that puts political pressure on the Conservatives, the government, to sort things out.
Digitum extractum, as a teacher once said to me at school, pull your finger out. And you asked what the consequences were, the economic consequences. I've just talked about what's immediately happened on financial markets, but I think the economic consequences could also be expressed in policy.
Yeah.
It depends what Boris Johnson and his new Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi want to do. It depends what their instincts are. There were hints in that letter from Rishi Sunak, a pretty bruising letter, lots of political barbs. But if you read the fine print, they clearly disagreed on tax. Downing Street have been briefing that the Chancellor was refusing Boris Johnson's determination to scrap a big increase in corporation tax that's coming next year from 19 to 25%. As any small business owner will tell you, that's coming down the track. It may be, in order to appeal to the grassroots, in order to appeal to his MPs and the wider base of Conservative voters, and indeed a lot of the country, Boris Johnson now goes for some more radical policies, maybe scrapping VAT on fuel, maybe cutting out that increase in corporation tax coming down the track, maybe a bit more support for households who are cash-strapped with those fuel bill increases happening. If he does do that, if he cuts taxes and we don't get growth, then the markets will take umbrage. But Tom Bow's exactly right. He's a gambler, and it might be that he's about to gamble big with economic policy by going for a more radical tax-cutting agenda.
Liam, thank you very much indeed. Leave it there. We'll take a break. And Liam, of course, we should tell you right across this story all day as the markets develop. A special show midday here on GB News. Back after this break.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A breezy day to come with some rain in the north, brighter skies further south with some sunshine for the far south of the UK, and feeling much warmer compared to recent days. High pressure is extending its influence across the southern half of the UK, but an area of low pressure is moving close to the north of Scotland, bringing some weather fronts with it, and that's why it is breezy, cloudy, and in some places wet across northern parts of the country. So for really northern Scotland, western Scotland, outbreaks of rain continuing through the morning into the early afternoon. The rain more on and off eastern Scotland, northern England, North Wales, Northern Ireland, petering out by the afternoon. But there is a gusty wind, and that's going to make it feel cool in the north. A complete contrast further south, 21 to 27 degrees with plenty of sunny spells. A sunnier day, in fact, compared to yesterday. And the cloud and the breeze in the north, well, that does push a little further south overnight, but the rain also peters out. The cloud develops some holes in it. However, we do have a relatively humid airflow now, and that means that it's going to be a mild or warm night in places, 16 or 17 degrees in the south, 12 to 14 degrees further north. A keen breeze runs down the North Sea on Thursday. That'll make it feel a bit cooler, and I think actually for many it's a cloudy start to the day. But as the day continues, the cloud will tend to lift and break up. Some decent sunny spells will break out, particularly for central and western areas. And for Scotland, certainly a brighter day with much less rain, but still some dampness in the far northwest. 16 Celsius in the Western Isles, 19 for Glasgow, 22 to 24 for southern parts of the UK. Friday is looking brighter and drier for many, plenty of sunshine around. Saturday is looking fine as well, and temperatures will rise.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Uh, 12 ministerial resignations in total we're hearing, but obviously these very minor roles, a lot of these resignations, but still they are coming in and they all make a statement by doing so. We'll keep you posted as the day goes on. We go now to Uxbridge, the Prime Minister's constituency. He holds a majority. It's a thin one, Alice Porter, 7,210. Tell us more.
Hi there, good morning. Well, I have to say, I've been here at Uxbridge and Ruislip a number of times over the last few months. I was here getting people's reaction to Partygate, to the vote of no confidence. And generally speaking, I've got a sense that people are still very loyal to Boris Johnson. But I think that could be changing. I think the question is, this is a very safe Tory seat, and there may be people here who are loyal to Conservatives, but it doesn't mean that they're loyal to Boris Johnson. In fact, I think it's often when you're in fact support a party, sometimes you get even more frustrated when the person who's representing it are not behaving in the way that you would like. I was out and about speaking to some people this morning about whether they think the PM should go, and this is what they had to say.
I do think that he needs to be held accountable for what he's done, the actions he took, and I think we need a new leader.
Well, I think he should stay because he's done a terrific job. You know, getting us Brexit through COVID.
The time's to go. You can't defend the indefensible.
And some of the people in Uxbridge and Ruislip speaking to me there, some people still quite loyal to Boris Johnson, but other people not so much. And I think this is what it really will come down to, is loyalty. We've seen with Gordon Brown, he was able to survive a ministerial resignation, but that's because the rest of the cabinet were loyal to him. We've already had two very, very significant people leaving yesterday, and there are more resignations that we've heard today. Will Quince, Laura Trott, two MPs, not as big a heavy hitters as Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak, but still will make a serious dent to the Conservative Party in many ways, and I think that loyalty will be surely tested at PMQs later today.
From Uxbridge, we go to Downing Street, and Isabel is there for us this morning, watching the comings and goings. Anything happening, Isabel? Anything to update on?
Well, I mean, it's been fast-paced, hasn't it, Eamonn, over the course of the last few hours. As you were saying a moment ago, 12 resignations, and I think it is really impossible to overstate the potential harm that creates to an already beleaguered premiership. This is a Prime Minister who's scrambling to try and find new MPs to fill positions. It's expected, the rumours are swirling, there will be further resignations. There are, of course, questions about whether or not the Prime Minister's own position will be tenable in a week's time when there are 1922 committee elections. elections, which could change the rules. He should be in a grace period for a year after last month's successful vote of no confidence when he managed to cling on. But there's risks involved in that election next week. Let's get the details of that quickly. One last hit from our political correspondent Tom Harwood into breakfast. And Tom, next week could be another flashpoint for the PM.
It could indeed. There are elections currently rolling on that terminate in a week today. Next Wednesday is when the 1922 executive elections complete, and there are many Tory MPs running, or standing I should say, to be on that executive on an explicit manifesto of changing those rules to allow a further vote of confidence, or indeed no confidence, in the Prime Minister. Now, things could move very quickly from next Wednesday were that to be the case, and it does look like, with all the discontent from even people who were on the side of the Prime Minister up until a few days ago, it looks like they may well get a majority on that committee. What could happen then? They could, as soon as next Wednesday, change the rules, force a vote, and we're hearing that many letters have already gone in anticipating just that situation.
OK, Tom, just finally and briefly, if you will, is there a chance that the Prime Minister could call a snap election to shore up his own position?
It would be an audacious task. Looking at the polls that are currently out, YouGov has brought out what's called an MRP poll this morning, which dives into the detail of a seat projection, projecting that the Tories would collapse down to 245 seats, down from 365 that they won the last time. Labour would be over 300. Labour and the SNP would be able to govern together. Labour and the Lib Dems might just be able to govern together. It would be a very, very bad move for the Tories at this stage, if we're to trust the polls, to call an election. And of course, as we know, divided parties rarely win elections, and if there's anything the Tories are looking this morning, it's divided.
OK, Tom, thank you very much. I know you'll be back in a few moments' time with your own programme, The Briefing. Just to say, though, Eamonn, a final thought, I suppose, from me here in Downing Street is that you can never, ever underestimate the power of the Prime Minister to hold on to power. He has been through so many crises, hasn't he, especially in the last 6-7 months, and he always comes out on top. He certainly won't be leaving this famous door behind me without screaming and kicking.
A political Houdini, Isabel, it has to be said. Thank you very much indeed.
Indeed.
Thank you to Norman Baker, who's been alongside me throughout the whole programme this morning. What would your final thoughts be as we look ahead to...
Houdini or Rasputin. He used to be indestructible. He's been drowned, he's been strangled, he's been dumped in the river, metaphorically, and he's still there. I think all I can say today is that if we get through the day without anything else happening, it'll be a complete miracle. I think there might be more resignations. There'll be a very tough time at the liaison committee. And there's no guarantee the Prime Minister will be here tomorrow morning.
But there's no guarantee he won't be.
Absolutely.
Norman, thanks very much indeed for your company this morning. Really appreciate it. Tom's next, as Isabel said. We'll be back in the morning, hopefully with a Trick Award, a Television Radio Industry Club Award. The programme is up for one of those tomorrow, and hopefully we'll have some good news for you. Fingers crossed. See you in the morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know.